Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I remember the first time I saw it. I had just gotten home after another long day at the office. It was late. It was quiet. I opened the door to my place, flipped on the living room light, and saw someone sitting in my old leather armchair near the fireplace. The figure didn't move. I stood there for a few seconds, my hand still on the switch, thinking maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there. But it was there. I could see the shape of it. No details, just a shape like a person, legs bent at the knees, arms on the chair's sides, head facing forward. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. It just stayed there, not moving, not making a sound. I turned around to set my keys on the kitchen counter. I could swear I felt its eyes on me. I turned back fast, but it hadn't moved. It just sat there. I don't share walls with anyone. I live alone in a small house just outside the city. There's a row of similar places on my street. Mostly older people live around here. Sometimes they have family over, but I don't see them often. My house is small. Living room, a tiny kitchen connected by a short hallway, one bedroom, one bathroom, and a small backyard. Nothing fancy. I've lived here for a few years. I've never seen anyone break in or trespass. That first night, I just stood there. I didn't feel right approaching it. I felt this heavy pressure in the air around it. It was like the air around the armchair was thicker. I could feel my breathing get slower when I looked at it. I took a step closer and noticed no smell, no strange sounds, no movement. I tried clearing my throat. I tried calling out, "Hey, who are you?" No response. The shape stayed exactly where it was. I stepped closer until I was about 5 feet away. I could see the worn leather under the figure's shape. The figure looked more like a silhouette than a solid person. I flicked the overhead light off, then on again. No change. It was still there. I didn't have the nerve to touch it. I don't know why. I just turned around and walked backward down the hall toward my bedroom, keeping it in my line of sight until I reached my bedroom door. I slipped inside and locked it. I leaned against the door, listening for any sounds outside. Nothing. After maybe 10 minutes, I opened the door again. The armchair was empty. The figure was gone. The room looked normal. The fireplace was dark and cold. Everything was where it should be. The next morning, I got up and checked the living room right away. Nothing strange. I shook my head and tried to explain it to myself. Maybe I was just tired and saw something. But that night after work, when I got home, it happened again. I turned on the light, and the figure was there. This time maybe a foot to the right, like it had shifted the chair slightly. I froze in place. I could feel my heart pounding. My forehead got damp. I said, "Who's there?" No answer. I walked around to see if I could make out the face. I circled the chair from a distance of about 6 feet, but from every angle it looked the same, a dark shape sitting perfectly still. When I stepped too close, I felt that same thick air. It was like walking into a wall of pressure that made my throat tighten. I backed off and went to my room again. I checked a few minutes later and it was gone. This time I rushed over to the chair and touched it. The leather felt normal. A bit of dust. The seat was a little worn from years of use. I didn't find any sign of a break-in. My front door was locked. Windows were locked. No tracks, no dirt, no footprints. On the third night it was there again, shifted a bit more. Now it was angled toward the hallway. I could see it the moment I walked in. I turned on every light in the place. I even grabbed my flashlight from a drawer and shined it directly at the figure. The light didn't help me see any face or clothes. It just confirmed there was a shape there blocking the chair's outline. I yelled, "I'm calling the police." No movement. I walked back outside and dialed the non-emergency line. It was late, and I told them I thought someone was in my house. They came after about 20 minutes. 2 officers. They checked the place thoroughly. By then, the figure was gone. They found no one inside. They looked at me like I was maybe imagining things. They left without finding anything. After that, I decided I would try something different. I set up a small camera on a shelf facing the chair and left it recording all night. I wanted proof. When I got home from work the next night, I walked straight to the camera and played back the footage. I saw only an empty armchair. No figure. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage. Nothing changed. But when I stood in the living room that night, the figure was right there in front of me. I tried adjusting the camera while it was sitting there, then checked the display screen live. The camera only showed the chair. No silhouette. I moved my hand in front of the camera and it recorded my hand just fine. But the figure didn't show up. It was like it wasn't visible to the camera. Over the next few nights, it got worse. Each time I came home, the figure was in a slightly different spot. Sometimes it seemed a bit closer to the center of the room. Once I swear it looked like it was leaning forward. Another time it seemed to be standing up next to the chair. I tried approaching it slowly. I got close enough that I could almost reach out and touch it. But the closer I got, the heavier the air felt. My chest got tight. My head pounded. My palms sweated. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I stepped back, trying to breathe. I tried talking to it. I said things like, "What do you want? Who are you? Why are you here?" No response. Not a single sound. No movement. I tried staying completely quiet, just watching it, seeing if it would shift or react. Nothing. It never made a sound. Never smelled like anything. Never gave any clue it even recognized me. One night I decided to stay outside and peek through a window before unlocking my front door. I could see the armchair from the side window near my kitchen. I looked carefully inside before entering. I didn't see the figure from that angle. But when I went inside and turned on the light, there it was. It was like it only appeared when I was physically present in the room. I considered sleeping somewhere else. I booked a cheap motel room down the road and stayed there one night. The next evening I came back to my house and checked if maybe it would be gone since I didn't come home the night before. No luck. As soon as I turned on the light, it was sitting in the armchair again, this time turned slightly toward the window. I started looking around the house for clues. The place was older, and when I moved in, I found some old junk in the attic. I went up there again, searching for anything related to the living room or the previous owner. I found a box of old letters, mostly junk mail, old receipts, a few photographs. The photos showed the interior of the house from decades ago. In one of them, I recognized the exact armchair. There was a man sitting in it, looking straight at the camera. I checked the back of the photo. No name, no date. Just the interior of my house looking cleaner and newer. That man in the photo was sitting in the same spot where I see the figure now. I couldn't tell if the figure resembled him. The figure had no details, no face, no clothes I could identify, but it felt like it matched somehow. I put the photo back and went downstairs. The figure wasn't there in the daytime. It only showed up when I came home late after work. So I tried changing my routine. I came home earlier the next day. Late afternoon. Sunlight was still coming through the windows. No figure. I waited until it got dark. As soon as I turned on the living room light after sunset, the figure appeared. It didn't matter what time of night it was, only that it was after dark. I tried to remove the armchair. I dragged it out into my backyard. It was heavy and old, and the leather smelled like dust. I left it there and came back inside. Without the armchair in the living room, I wondered where the figure would sit. That night, when I turned on the light, the figure appeared anyway. It stood where the chair used to be, now just standing in open space. Same shape, same thick air. Now I knew it wasn't tied to the chair itself. I dragged the armchair back inside because leaving it out there didn't help. I tried shining a bright flashlight right at it. The beam hit the wall behind where the figure stood, but I couldn't make out any features on it. It was like looking at a hole in the air. I reached my hand toward it, and the moment I got within a foot of it, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My ears rang. I pulled back, breathing hard. I felt sweat trickle down my spine. After a week of this, I started getting desperate. I tried calling a friend who knows a bit about the neighborhood's history. He told me the previous owner was an older man who lived here alone for many years before moving to a nursing home. The man had left behind some furniture, including the armchair. The friend said the old man loved that armchair. He said it was where the man spent all his evenings. He didn't say anything about strange sightings, just that the man never really wanted to leave. I had no better ideas. I tried speaking calmly to the figure when I came home that night. I said, "I know you were here before me. I understand this was your space." I paused. No response. I tried again. "I'm just living here now. I'm not here to take anything from you." Still nothing. But I didn't feel as much pressure that night. It was still there, but I noticed I could breathe a bit easier. I tried leaving something for it. I set a small table next to the armchair. I placed a cup of coffee there. When I came back after a moment, the coffee was still there, untouched, but somehow the figure seemed less solid. I'm not sure if it changed or if I just imagined that. The next night, I tried something else. I sat down on the floor, a few feet away from it, and just waited. I didn't talk. I didn't make sudden moves. I just sat there, looking in its direction, waiting. After several minutes, it faded out. It just disappeared. The room felt lighter. I could breathe normally. I stood up, turned around, and went to my bedroom. The next night, when I returned home, I entered slowly. I turned on the light, and the figure was back, but it looked more faint. I approached it until that pressure returned, but this time it was weaker. I said, "I'm not trying to push you out. I know this place was yours. I just need to live here. I'm not disturbing your things. I'm not here to fight." I stood there quietly. My heart beat fast, but I tried to stay calm. After a minute or so, the figure disappeared again. I touched the armchair. It felt normal. The pressure in my chest eased right away. Over the next few days, I came home and repeated this. I would enter slowly, speak quietly, and not make sudden moves. Each time I did that, the figure either appeared faintly or didn't appear at all. On a few evenings, I didn't see it. The living room stayed empty and calm. The air felt normal. I tested the lights, checked the door, walked around the chair, ran my hand along the old leather. Nothing. On a Sunday night after a week of these attempts, I came home late again, just like before, and flipped on the light. The figure didn't show up. I waited a few minutes, walked around, opened the door again, closed it, turned the light off and on. Still nothing. The air felt normal. I ran my hands along the armchair. The leather was smooth under my palms. No pressure, no thick feeling in my lungs. I said, "Are you still here?" Nothing. Just silence. I sat down in the armchair for a few minutes. I didn't feel anything unusual. I got up, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and stood in the doorway. Everything looked normal. I stayed up a few hours that night, waiting to see if the figure would return. It never did. The next night I came home, turned on the light, and still no figure. The armchair looked empty and still. I sat in it again, feeling the worn cushions, the old leather creaking slightly under my weight. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and it felt like a regular old chair. Nothing strange. I don't know exactly why it stopped appearing. Maybe it had something to do with the old man who used to live here, or the way I behaved. Maybe acknowledging it made it fade away. I'm not sure. All I know is that after that week, I never saw the figure again. Now I come home, turn on the lights, and see an empty living room. The fireplace is still there, unused. The old leather armchair is still in the same spot. Sometimes I remember how it felt, coming in late at night, seeing that shape, feeling my chest tighten. But that's over now. The figure never returned. My house is quiet and normal again. I keep my routine simple. I come home, turn on the lights, and see nothing but furniture and shadows. That's all I've got now, and I'm fine with it. I noticed something was off with the mirror on my second day in the boarding house. The bathroom here is shared by everyone on the same floor. There's a single mirror mounted above the two sinks near the showers. When I first used it, I didn't think much of it. It looked like an old mirror with a few dark spots on the edges. The surface was clean enough, and the frame was a dull metal. But the next morning, when I went in to wash my face, I paused. My eyes in the reflection didn't look right. They seemed spaced out just a little more than they should be. My jaw looked slightly narrower. Nothing huge, but enough that I stared at myself, wondering if I was just tired. I ran water over my face and looked again. My reflection shifted back to normal. I figured it was my imagination. A few days later, I was in the bathroom alone. The others who rent rooms here are often out at work or doing something else. It was around 7 in the evening. I turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face, and looked up. This time, my face in the mirror seemed longer. My nose looked crooked. My eyes appeared a shade darker. I leaned in, trying to see if the glass was dirty. As I did, I noticed something else. There was a shape over my right shoulder. I saw a slight movement, like a person standing right behind me. I turned around fast, and there was no one. The bathroom door was locked from inside. The shower curtains were open. There was nowhere a person could hide. I looked back at the mirror. The shape was gone. My reflection looked normal again. I didn't say anything to anyone. I thought maybe I was stressed or half asleep. Over the next week, I started paying more attention. Every time I went in there, I tried not to look directly at the mirror. I would just do what I needed to do and leave. But it's hard not to look. The mirror is right there. One morning, after breakfast, I went in to brush my teeth. The fluorescent light above the sinks flickered sometimes. While brushing, I glanced up. For a moment, I saw my face, but my eyes were too large. My cheeks looked hollow, and my neck looked thinner. I stopped brushing and spit out the toothpaste, then looked around me. Nothing. Just the same old bathroom smell, the damp towels on the hooks, and the sound of the faucet dripping. I looked back at the mirror. This time, behind me, I saw that faint movement again, like a dark figure passing behind my back. I felt my heart beat faster. I turned, opening the shower curtains, checking the toilet stalls. Nothing. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I rushed out and returned to my room. I live in a small room 2 doors down. It's just a bed, a desk, and a chair. The walls are thin. I can hear other tenants walking or opening doors. That evening, I tried to forget about the mirror. I read a bit, listened to some music through my phone's cheap earbuds. When I finally went to use the bathroom before sleeping, I hesitated. It was late. I knew no one would be in there at this hour. I turned on the light and stood in front of the sink. The mirror was right there. I saw my face. It looked normal. I reached out with my hand, just wanting to wipe the surface with my towel. Maybe there was dust or something on it. When my fingertips touched it, I pulled back instantly. It was colder than any surface I'd felt in a room that wasn't refrigerated. The temperature in the bathroom was normal, but the glass felt icy. I set my towel down and tried again, pressing my palm against it. It felt like I was touching a block of ice. My hand started trembling, not from fear, but from the shock of how cold it was. I stepped back. I turned around to see if there was some air vent blowing directly onto it. There wasn't. The vents were on the ceiling, not pointed at the mirror. I tried to push it from my mind. But over the next few days, it kept happening. I would catch glimpses of myself with features slightly off. If I stared long enough, my reflection would return to normal. But if I looked for even a few seconds too long, I'd notice something behind me in the glass. Just a faint shape, like a person standing still, watching me. I never saw it in the actual room, only in the reflection. Sometimes I'd think I heard soft footsteps behind me when I was alone. Other times I felt a slight chill on the back of my neck. Nothing else in the boarding house felt strange. The halls were normal. My room felt normal. The kitchen and living area were normal. It was only in that bathroom, in front of that mirror. One afternoon, I decided to ask the landlord if there was something about the mirror. He was an older guy, usually found at the front desk. I caught him after lunch. I asked how long the mirror had been there. He looked at me like I was asking a weird question. He said it had been there since he bought the place years ago. He didn't remember replacing it. I asked if anyone had complained about it. He shook his head and said no, it was just a regular mirror. I didn't press further because I didn't want to sound crazy. I just said it looked old and maybe it needed replacing. He shrugged and said he would think about it. A few days later, I decided to clean the mirror myself. I brought a rag and some glass cleaner with me. I waited until I heard no one else moving around, probably late afternoon when most people were out. I stood in front of it and sprayed the cleaner. The liquid ran down in streaks. I reached up with the rag and started wiping. The glass stayed cold. I rubbed hard, but the surface never warmed. I felt the muscles in my forearm tighten. I wiped until the surface was spotless. When I finished, I stepped back and looked. My reflection stared at me. It looked normal at first glance. I turned off the faucet. As I did, I saw the reflection's mouth move. But I hadn't moved my own mouth. It was just a tiny movement, like it opened slightly, then closed. I leaned forward. I felt sweat on my forehead. My heart was beating fast. I moved my jaw slowly. The reflection matched my movement this time. I nodded my head. The reflection nodded. I raised one eyebrow, it did the same. I opened my mouth, it opened its mouth. I exhaled. Maybe I imagined that odd movement a second ago. I stared longer, not blinking. I wanted to catch it doing something else. My eyes began to tear up from not blinking. I finally blinked, and when I did, I thought I saw the figure behind me again. This time it looked closer. I spun around. Nothing there. My hand was shaking. I decided to leave. As I took a step back, the reflection seemed to lag just half a second behind my movement. I didn't wait any longer. I walked out, closed the door, and went back to my room. Over the next week, I tried to avoid the bathroom, but I couldn't forever. I needed to shower. I needed to brush my teeth. Every time I walked in, I felt a tightness in my chest. Sometimes I took quick glances in the mirror, and everything looked normal. Other times I saw small changes. Once my left ear looked bigger. Another time my chin was too pointed. These changes never lasted long. Always a few seconds, then back to normal. Once, while shaving, I heard a soft creaking sound. I froze and stared at the doorway behind me in the reflection. For a moment, I saw a tall, dark shape with no details. Just a shape. It was standing in the corner near the door. When I turned, nothing was there. The corner was empty. The door was still closed. After that, I felt a dryness in my mouth. I cut myself shaving. The cut stung and a small spot of blood ran down my chin. I rinsed it off and left as soon as I could. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed, thinking about that mirror. I would try to make sense of it. I knew I should just ignore it. I tried using the bathroom fast. I looked down at the sink when washing up, never directly into the glass. But the problem was I always ended up looking at it, even if just from the corner of my eye. My curiosity, or maybe my fear, made me check if something was still off. And it always was, at least some of the time. One night, I thought I heard someone trying to open my door. I got up and checked. It was locked. No one was there. I walked down the hall to see if someone else was awake. No one was around. The hall was quiet. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I stood at the bathroom door. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. I listened. No sound. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The light was off. I reached for the switch. It clicked, and the lights came on. The mirror caught my eye right away. My reflection's eyes looked off again. I felt a shiver in my legs. I wanted to check if the surface was still cold. I reached out my hand slowly. I touched it with my fingertips. It felt freezing. My hand trembled a bit. I pressed my palm against it. The reflection's hand matched mine exactly. I leaned in closer, just a few inches from the glass. I could see the pores on my nose. Everything looked normal except for a slight twist in my right eyebrow. I focused on that. I tried to smooth my own eyebrow with my finger. The reflection did the same, but a fraction of a second after I did it. My reflection's timing was just a bit off, like a delayed video feed. I pulled my hand back and rubbed my arm. The room felt colder than normal. I looked behind me. Nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, I could have sworn I saw the reflection's arms move up toward me, but I was standing still. It was so fast that I couldn't be sure. I stepped back until I was against the far wall, never taking my eyes off the mirror. The reflection got smaller as I moved away, but I swore its eyes were locked on mine. After a few moments, I left. The next day, I tried talking to another tenant about the bathroom. He was a guy my age, always wearing headphones. I asked if he ever noticed anything strange about the mirror. He looked at me confused, said it was just an old mirror. I asked if he ever saw anything weird in it. He just shrugged and shook his head, telling me I was probably seeing things. I didn't try asking anyone else after that. I felt stupid, but I knew what I had seen. I decided I had to do something more direct. Late that night, I went back into the bathroom with a small hammer. I closed the door and locked it. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from adrenaline. I didn't want to cause trouble by breaking property, but I needed to know. I needed to see what would happen if the mirror broke. Maybe I'd find a normal wall behind it. Maybe I'd prove it was just old glass. I stood in front of it and raised the hammer. The reflection showed me raising the hammer. I waited. I breathed loudly through my nose. My heart was pounding in my ears. I lowered the hammer and pressed my free hand against the glass, still cold as ice. I pulled my hand back and tried to see if there was any gap between the mirror and the wall. The mirror seemed mounted firmly, no screws visible on the front. I stepped back, holding the hammer at my side. I felt sweat on my neck. As I stood there, the reflection looked normal again. I saw my own tired face, the circles under my eyes, the tense set of my jaw. Nothing strange. I didn't see any figure behind me. I didn't see any distortion. It looked perfectly normal. I reached out and touched it again. Still cold. I raised the hammer slowly. My elbow locked. I aimed at the lower corner of the mirror, a spot where maybe I could chip it without making a huge noise. I tried to do it gently. I tapped the hammer once. The metal connected with a dull sound. Nothing cracked. I tapped it again a bit harder. The mirror vibrated slightly. My reflection trembled. I saw a tiny chip in the corner. A small piece of glass fell into the sink. At that moment, I caught a movement in the reflection. My reflection's eyes widened. My own eyes were focused and steady. I realized the reflection's expression didn't match mine. I froze. The reflection's mouth opened slightly. My mouth stayed closed. My breathing stopped for a second. I tapped the hammer again on the corner. Another small chip. This time, I heard a soft scraping sound. I looked down at the sink. The chipped bits of glass were there. I looked back up. The reflection's face looked angry, or maybe frustrated. Its eyebrows were drawn inward. Mine weren't. I tried to raise my eyebrows. The reflection raised them too, but too late. I could see it lagging behind. I moved my right hand slowly. The reflection followed, but with a tiny delay. I stepped back, putting the hammer on the counter. The reflection gripped an invisible hammer in its own hand, but a fraction of a second after me. It was like it was trying to copy my actions, but was always late. I reached for the doorknob. I wanted to leave. As I touched the knob, I heard a light tap on the glass behind me. I turned around. The reflection looked normal again, mirroring my movements correctly. I unlocked the door and left the bathroom. I walked back to my room and shut the door. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I gathered my things and decided to move out. I didn't tell the landlord why. I said I found another place closer to work. He didn't ask many questions. I left that same day. As I carried my suitcase down the hall, I glanced once at the bathroom door. It was closed. I could hear faint water dripping inside. I didn't look back again. I didn't tell anyone else what happened. I just left, relieved to be gone. I never saw that mirror again. I remember the day I first took the bells out of the box. I had just come home from my cousin's place where they handed me this old wooden crate. It had been sitting in my family's attic for decades. My cousin said it belonged to our grandfather and that I should take it. I had no reason to refuse. It looked solid, no strange smells, no damage I could see. I brought it home, set it on my kitchen table, and opened it. Inside I found a set of old metal bells, each about the size of my fist. There were 5 bells in total, each attached to a small metal loop. They were tarnished but not broken, and they looked handmade. I decided to hang them on my living room wall. I wasn't sure why I did that. I guess I just wanted to show them off, or maybe I thought they would look interesting. I put them up on a strong nail, making sure they wouldn't fall. Then I went to bed and slept without any problem. The first night they rang at midnight, I woke up confused. I had been asleep maybe for a few hours. I heard a faint metal sound. I got out of bed, walked into the living room, and stood there in the dark. I listened. The bells shook slightly on the wall. They weren't blowing in any draft. There was no open window. I didn't see any insects or small animals. Yet they made a quiet, uneven ringing. I stood in front of them and watched them. They moved a bit back and forth, tapping against the wall. They weren't swinging wildly, just enough to produce a slow, irregular ringing. I stood there for maybe a minute, and then it stopped. I felt a chill in my back. I reached out and touched them. They felt cold. I put my ear close, and I swear I heard a faint whisper inside the bell's surface, like a thin, scraping sound. But I thought maybe I was just half asleep. I went back to bed. The next day I barely thought about it. The second night it happened again at midnight. The bells rang a bit louder. They woke me up, and this time I turned on the living room light. I saw them swinging a little more, and I could hear a pattern in the ringing. The pattern was not melodic, not pleasant. It sounded clumsy, as if something was trying to play a tune but couldn't get it right. After about 30 seconds, the sound stopped again. I waited to see if it would start again, but it didn't. I touched them again, and I looked closely at their surface. I noticed that each bell had small markings. I couldn't make them out. They were very tiny, like scratches or engravings. I tried to rub them off with my thumb, but nothing happened. I got a magnifying glass from a drawer and looked closely. The lines looked like some kind of symbols. They were arranged in small rows around each bell, very thin, almost invisible. I had never seen anything like it. I felt uneasy. I put the magnifying glass back and turned off the light. I couldn't sleep well the rest of the night. The next morning I took the bells down and placed them on my dining table. I inspected them again in the sunlight. The symbols were still there. They looked like small runes or letters I had never seen before. They weren't random scratches. They seemed deliberate. They formed consistent shapes and patterns on each bell's surface. I felt a kind of tension in my neck and shoulders. I didn't know what to do. I decided to leave them off the wall. I put them in a cabinet under the TV. I locked the cabinet and left the apartment to run some errands. That night, just before midnight, I sat in my living room with the TV off, lights off, and listened. I waited, breathing slowly, trying to calm myself. Right as my phone showed midnight, I heard them again. They rang inside the locked cabinet. I froze. The cabinet door vibrated slightly. I got up and opened it. The bells were there, lying on their side, ringing softly. I leaned in and listened carefully. The room was quiet except for them. Then, under the ringing, I heard a low whisper. It sounded like my own name. It was not loud. It was more like a dry voice forming the syllables. I felt a sudden wave of heat in my face. My hands shook a bit. I pulled the bells out and placed them on the coffee table. They stopped moving as soon as I removed them from the cabinet. I took a step back. My breathing was quick. I looked around my apartment. Everything else was normal. The walls, the furniture, the closed windows. Only these bells seemed alive. I didn't know what to do. I turned on the TV for some background noise. I didn't sleep until morning. For the next few days, I tried several things. I took the bells and placed them in different spots. One night, I wrapped them in towels and placed them inside a metal toolbox in my closet. At midnight, they rang again, muffled by the towels, but still audible. Another night, I put them out in the hallway of my building, inside a cardboard box. I sat in my living room with the door closed and listened. At midnight, I heard the faint ringing coming from outside the door. They were always active at that exact time. Another time, I tried to hold them down with my hands at midnight to see if something physically moved them. I felt a slight vibration. My fingers tingled. My palms got sweaty. I heard that whisper again. It sounded like my name, repeated quietly but firmly over and over. I decided I should try to identify the symbols on their surface. I borrowed a better magnifying glass from a neighbor. I sat at my dining table in the late afternoon, the bells in front of me, and examined each symbol. They were intricate, with tiny straight lines and angles. Some looked like small triangles with lines inside. Others looked like squares with a diagonal slash. They weren't random. They formed sequences, repeated patterns, wrapping around each bell in neat rows. I wrote them down on a piece of paper, copying them as best as I could. I tried to search online for similar runes or symbols. I looked at old alphabets, ancient scripts, carvings from different cultures. Nothing matched exactly. I spent hours on this, sweating and feeling frustrated. I felt a pressure in my chest. The bells lay there, silent, waiting. As midnight approached that day, I felt dread. I knew what would happen. I tried to prepare. I turned off all the lights, sat in my armchair, and held a flashlight in my hand. When the bells started ringing, I would shine the light on them and watch carefully. I sat there waiting. My mouth was dry. At midnight, the bells began. They shook on the coffee table. The sound was sharper tonight, louder. I saw them lift slightly off the surface, just a fraction of an inch. My flashlight beam caught them at an angle. They seemed to vibrate in a way I couldn't explain. The whispering was clearer. I heard my name. It was not my voice. It was not a voice I recognized. It sounded neutral, calm, and forced. I saw no speaker. I saw only these 5 bells rattling in unison. I yelled at them, demanding they stop. I banged my fist on the table. They fell still. The ringing ceased. The whispering faded. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I felt dizzy. I took a few deep breaths and wiped sweat from my forehead. The bells just lay there as if nothing happened. I picked one up. It felt heavy and cold. I shook it, but it didn't ring. It was silent, just a piece of metal. I put it back. I stayed up the rest of the night watching TV with the volume low, trying not to think. Over the next week, things got worse. The bells didn't just ring at midnight. They started at random times, always short bursts of sound. I would be in the kitchen washing dishes, and I would hear a light chime from the living room. I would come out, and the bells would be shifting slightly. Once, I was on the phone with a friend, and I heard them ring quietly behind me. My friend asked what that noise was. I said it was nothing important, just something old I inherited. I didn't want to explain. It sounded stupid. I tried to ignore them, but I couldn't. Every time they rang, I felt tense. My neck muscles got stiff. My stomach felt uneasy. I started to sleep less. I set my alarm for early morning so I could stay awake until after midnight, deal with them, and then pass out from exhaustion. This routine drained me. I tried removing them from my home. One afternoon, I put them in a bag and drove out of town. I planned to leave them at a friend's storage unit. I didn't say they were haunted or anything. I just said I needed a place to store some old family stuff. I parked my car near the friend's building. I opened the trunk and checked the bells. They were inside a canvas bag, not ringing, not moving. As I walked toward the storage unit, I heard a faint hum come from the bag. It was not midnight, it was about 6 p.m. I stopped and felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was outside, in the open air. I looked around. No one else was nearby. The bells were humming, a steady, low tone. I turned around and walked back to the car. I didn't know what I was doing. I sat in the driver's seat, listening to the hum. After a minute, it stopped. I realized I didn't want to burden my friend with this. I knew something was wrong with these bells. I drove home, feeling my hands tremble on the steering wheel. Back in my apartment, I placed the bells in a drawer. I paced around, rubbing my face, trying to think of something else. I decided to try a more direct approach. I tried to break one. I took a hammer from my toolbox and went to the kitchen sink. I pulled out one bell and placed it on a thick wooden cutting board. I lifted the hammer and brought it down hard. The hammer bounced off. The bell didn't dent, didn't scratch. I hit it again. Same result. I tried a screwdriver, wedging it inside to see if I could pry anything loose. Nothing. The metal wouldn't bend. I got frustrated and started breathing hard. My face grew hot. I put the tools away and gripped the edge of the sink, trying to calm down. The bell lay there, as if mocking me. Later that night, I tried recording the sound. At midnight, I turned on my voice recorder app on my phone and placed it next to the bells. They rang for about 20 seconds, then stopped. I played back the recording. It picked up the ringing, but not the whisper. On playback, there was no voice calling my name. It was just the bell sounds, distorted and uneven. I tried again the next night with a different recorder. Same result. The whispering only happened when I was listening live. It never showed up on a recording. I felt like I was losing control of the situation. I decided to bring the bells to an antique shop. Maybe someone would recognize their style. I packed them into a box and took them downtown. I went inside a small shop where they sold old lamps, clocks, and various old items. The owner, an older man with glasses, examined the bells. He said they looked old, handmade, and probably came from some small foundry decades ago. He said he had never seen symbols like that. He tried ringing one by hand. It sounded normal. He said they might be collector's items. He didn't offer to buy them. He said he wasn't sure of their value. I left feeling disappointed and tired. Back home, the bells continued their behavior. Now, every time I got close to midnight, I felt a tightness in my chest. I would sit on my couch staring at them. They would start ringing. I would listen to that whisper of my name, feel my scalp prickle, and want to run out of the room. But I stayed. I touched them once while they rang. They vibrated under my fingertips. They were cold and smooth. I felt a slight, static-like sensation. My arm hair stood up. I stopped inviting anyone over. I tried to hide the bells. I put them in the basement storage area of my building. At midnight, I went down there, unlocked the door, and listened. They rang, echoing off the concrete walls. It sounded louder down there, with no furniture or soft surfaces to absorb the sound. The whisper was clearer. I stood alone in that dim space, sweating, my heartbeat pounding, listening to them say my name. I spoke back quietly, asking what they wanted. I received no answer, just more ringing, more whispering. In the following weeks, I just endured it. I tried wearing earplugs at midnight, but I could still feel the vibration. I tried turning on loud music, but I could still detect the bells underneath. The ringing was part of my nightly routine now. I woke up, went about my day, worked, ate, tried to relax, then waited for midnight and dealt with the bells. Sometimes they rang for a few seconds, sometimes a whole minute. Sometimes the whisper repeated my name once, sometimes several times. I never heard any other words. I grew used to the tension. My chest still tightened at midnight, but I expected it. My throat felt dry, but I kept a glass of water on the table. I watched the bells with a steady stare, waiting for them to stop. After they finished, I would pick them up, move them to another place, and try to sleep. They never seemed to care where I placed them. They would always ring at midnight. Always. I don't know what the symbols mean. I don't know why they say my name. I can't break them. I can't discard them. I can't make them stop. They just exist in my life now. Every day I wonder if tonight they will do something different. But they haven't. They ring, whisper, and stop. It's always the same. I wish I could give a reason, but I have none. They are just old bells that my family kept, and now I have them. I hear them every night. I know they will never leave me. I know I will never understand them. So I wait, listening to those uneven tones and that quiet, steady voice. I started this job about 3 months ago. I work as a night watchman on a quiet street that doesn't see much movement after midnight. It's not a big deal. I walk from one end to the other, check a few warehouses, make sure no one is breaking in. I don't carry a gun, just a flashlight and a radio. I started because I needed something steady and I didn't want to deal with customers anymore. The pay is fine, the hours suck, but I thought I could handle it. For the first few weeks it was uneventful. I tried to stay awake by counting steps or humming quietly. I sometimes sipped coffee from a thermos. The only thing that stood out was an old phone booth at the end of the street, near an abandoned lot with cracked pavement and rusted fencing. The phone booth is small, with dirty glass and chipped paint. The door doesn't close right. The receiver is scratched, the cord twisted. I've never seen anyone use it. There's no light inside. It's just there. One night around 3 in the morning, I was passing by that booth. It was my second month on the job. I had stopped about 10 feet away because I thought I heard a noise. I stood there, listened for a second, and then I heard a faint ringing. It sounded like a telephone ring, but not clear. It was uneven, like something was wrong with the bell. I looked around, saw no one, no cars. The sound was coming from the booth. I stepped closer and pressed my ear to the door. The phone was ringing. I tried to remember if that booth was even connected to anything. I'd never seen a phone company truck come by. It looked abandoned. I waited. The ringing kept going. It didn't stop. I felt a pressure in my chest. I didn't want to pick it up, but I also didn't want it to keep ringing. I imagined some drunk guy inside, maybe hiding, but I saw no one. I slid the door open. It made a scraping noise. Inside, it smelled like dust and old metal. The receiver was hanging. I picked it up. I said, "Hello?" I heard something on the other end, but it wasn't clear. It sounded like a whisper, but too soft and broken. I said hello again, louder. No words came through, just this muffled sound like someone breathing too close to the mouthpiece. I stood there holding the phone, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard a few words. They were spoken in a low tone. They sounded like someone trying to speak with their mouth covered. I couldn't catch the meaning, but the voice felt familiar in a strange way. My hand holding the receiver started to sweat. I shook my head, said, "I can't hear you." The whispering continued, but it never got louder. I hung up. The booth fell silent. I looked around outside. Nobody, no movement, just the distant hum of a street lamp. I told myself it was just a weird glitch. Maybe the phone line was still connected to something old, maybe picking up radio interference. I tried to forget about it and continued my patrol. I didn't tell my supervisor. I didn't see the point. The next night, I didn't pass by the booth until about 3 o'clock again. I was trying not to think about it, but when I got close, I slowed down. Everything was quiet. Then the phone rang again. Same broken sound, like a weak bell. I didn't want to answer, but I also didn't want to leave it ringing. I stepped inside and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" The whispering was back. It sounded distorted. I listened carefully. I could make out a few words this time. It sounded like my name, said very quietly. I heard "you" and something that sounded like "remember." I asked who it was. No response, just more faint whispers. I felt my stomach tighten. I hung up again. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. At 3 in the morning, the phone rang in that old booth. I couldn't ignore it. It got under my skin. I started approaching the booth more carefully. Some nights I considered not answering, but the ringing wouldn't stop. I tried waiting once. I stood there across the street watching the booth. The ringing continued without any pause. It sounded muffled, but it was consistent. After a few minutes, I gave in. I answered. The whispers greeted me, always barely audible, always broken and low. I noticed that sometimes it sounded like multiple voices at once. Sometimes I could swear I heard my own voice in there like an echo. It didn't make sense. I checked the phone cord. It was worn but still attached. I looked for any cables leading to the booth. I found none. I pulled open a small panel at the base of the booth, expecting to see a phone line. There was nothing, just an empty metal cavity. I started feeling uneasy before my shift even began. I knew I'd have to pass that booth at some point. The third week of this happening, the whispering got more personal. On one call, I heard something that sounded like, "You think no one knows." Another time I heard, "She left because of you." My throat got dry. I tried to speak back, to demand explanations, but the voices never answered direct questions. They only whispered in fragments. I felt sweat on my back whenever I approached that spot. It was late October. The nights were getting colder, but I was always warm and tense near the booth. I would feel my heartbeat in my ears. I caught myself avoiding my reflection in the booth's glass. I kept looking around to see if anyone was watching. I never saw a soul. I tried to record it once. I brought a small tape recorder and held it near the receiver. Later, I played it back in the guard office. I heard static, some faint crackling sounds, but no clear voices. It was useless. I thought about telling someone, but what would I say? That a dead phone line rings at 3 in the morning and whispers strange things that sound like they know my past? They'd think I was losing it. I needed this job, so I kept quiet. The calls got more intense after a while. One night I answered, and before I could say anything, I heard heavy breathing and a long moan, followed by a whisper that sounded like my old boss's name. I hadn't thought about that guy in years. I had left that job on bad terms. Another time, the voice mentioned details about a fight I'd had with an ex-girlfriend. It knew the exact words I had yelled. Hearing that made me feel cold sweat on my forehead. My hands shook. I hung up quickly and stood outside the booth, staring at it, breathing hard. How the hell did this thing know these details? I tried ignoring it for a few nights. I'd stay as far as I could from that end of the street until after 3. But I still had to check all my points. One night I approached the booth at 3:15 thinking maybe I missed the call. It rang the moment I got there, like it had been waiting. I picked it up, furious. I said, "Who are you?" I tried to sound calm, but my voice came out strained. The response was a series of whispers that sounded like laughter, then a few words I couldn't understand. My chest felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I wanted to yank the phone out of the booth, but I worried someone might notice and ask questions. Besides, I wasn't sure if it would stop anything. I tried covering the receiver while it whispered, thinking maybe I'd hear something behind me. Maybe someone was nearby with a hidden device. I heard nothing but my own breathing and distant traffic noises. No footsteps, no other voices. Just me, the booth, and that soft, broken whisper. As nights passed, I started feeling jumpy at work. I reacted to small sounds. My radio crackling made me flinch. I caught myself walking faster between checks, glancing over my shoulder. I rubbed the back of my neck constantly. The whispering started focusing on my fears. It would mention things I never told anyone. It described moments when I was alone in my apartment, pacing around, worried about bills or about getting fired. It said things like, "You're not good enough." It said, "They know about your lies." It reminded me of times I messed up on the job, things I tried to forget. I clenched my jaw so hard I got headaches. I could feel my pulse in my temples. My shoulders ached from being tense all night. One night I decided to unplug the phone. I brought a small toolkit. Around 3, the call came. I answered just to confirm it was still happening. The whispering started. I let it go on for a moment, then I hung up, crouched down, and unscrewed the panel under the phone. I grabbed the cord inside and pulled. It came loose easily. There was no wiring going out. The phone was disconnected from everything. I checked the main cable. Nothing led to the street. No line. I stared at that disconnected wire in my hand. It was just a loose piece of cable frayed at the ends. No way this booth had a working line. I stood there holding that useless wire, my heart pounding. I heard the phone ring again behind me. I turned and saw the receiver shaking slightly on its cradle. I picked it up, more angry than scared now. I said nothing. I listened. The whispering was still there, unaffected. My chest felt like it was full of stones. My throat was dry. I hung up and backed out of the booth, leaving my toolkit behind. I had to breathe slowly to keep calm. It made no sense. I was wide awake. I walked away and returned to my route, but my mind stayed there. I had no way to explain it. The next night I brought my phone and tried to call someone at 3 a.m. I planned to let them hear it. But when the time came, as I reached the booth, I tried to call my buddy from my cell. The signal cut out. I got static. I tried stepping away, but my phone froze. Then the booth rang. My hand shook as I answered. I tried to hold my cell phone's speaker to the booth's receiver. I got nothing on playback later. I felt trapped. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't stop it. Every night it rang. Every night the whispers got more personal, more uncomfortable. It talked about my fears of losing my job. It mentioned times I got angry and broke things in my apartment, times I never told anyone about. It commented on how I avoided calling my mother because I didn't want to answer her questions about my life. It said things that made me feel exposed. I scratched my arms until they were red. The physical reaction was immediate every time now. I sweated through my shirt. My breathing was short and rough. My legs felt weak. My eyes darted around for someone to blame. I even tried staying inside one of the warehouses until after 3, but I had to pass that booth eventually. It always rang when I was nearby, always at that exact time. If I approached at 3:30, it waited until I got close, then started ringing. If I came early, it stayed silent until the clock hit 3. Then it rang. I considered quitting, but I needed this job. I told myself I could handle it. They were just voices, just sounds. They couldn't hurt me. But they knew too much. I couldn't block out what they said. Each time I answered, I gripped the receiver tight and tried to stay calm. I said nothing. Sometimes I tried to yell at them, but they never reacted. They just kept whispering. Sometimes I thought I recognized a friend's voice or someone from my past, but it never lasted long enough to be sure. It was like multiple voices layered on top of each other, fading in and out. Sometimes they sounded angry, sometimes amused, sometimes just sad. My shift started feeling endless. I began dreading that single moment of the night. Everything else was fine. No break-ins, no trouble. Just that booth and its impossible call. One night I came prepared with a hammer. I reached the booth before 3. I looked around. The street was empty. I opened the door and took the hammer to the receiver. I hit it a few times until the plastic cracked. I hit the cradle. I hit the walls. The glass shook. I tore the cord off the receiver completely. I dropped the pieces to the ground. I felt my heart pounding. My palms were wet. I stood there breathing hard, looking at the broken phone. It was in pieces. The receiver was cracked open, the internal parts exposed. No one would ever use it again. I stepped outside and looked at my watch. It was 3 on the dot. A scratching noise came from inside the booth. I froze. I leaned inside. The broken receiver twitched on the floor. I heard a faint whisper from the twisted speaker inside it. I didn't understand the words. It sounded weaker than before, but it was still there. I backed away, pressing my back against the fence. I stood there, not sure what to do. The whispers continued for a full minute, then stopped. I left the pieces there and finished my shift without going near it again. For the next few nights, I tried not to look at the booth. The phone was broken. There was no ringing. I hoped it would stay silent. But I still felt uneasy passing that spot. On the 4th night after I smashed it, I noticed that the booth's door was closed again. I looked inside. The phone was back on the hook, intact. The glass was still dirty, the paint still chipped, but the phone looked untouched. The cord was back in place. The receiver looked whole. I stepped inside, not believing my eyes. I touched the receiver. No cracks, no damage. It was as if I never touched it. I felt a heavy pressure in my chest. I stood there breathing fast. I checked my watch. 3 minutes to 3. I ran out of the booth and stood on the sidewalk, my fists clenched. I waited. At 3, it rang again. It sounded exactly the same, that weak, broken ring. I walked away. I forced myself not to answer. I kept walking until I couldn't hear it anymore. It kept ringing faintly behind me, but I did not turn back. I finished my shift, ignoring the booth completely. The next night, I tried the same. When it rang, I just kept walking. It rang and rang, but I did not answer. I felt sweat under my arms, my stomach tight, but I forced myself to keep going. On the third night of ignoring it, it began ringing earlier at 2:50, then at 2:45 the next day, as if trying to catch me off guard. I refused to answer. I noticed that without answering, the whispering never reached me. I didn't have to hear its words. It bothered me to know it was still there, but at least I didn't have to listen. I continued my rounds like that for weeks. The booth kept ringing at odd times. Sometimes at 3, sometimes earlier or later, sometimes right when I passed by. I never answered again. The tension remained, but I kept walking, hands shaking, jaw clenched, breathing carefully. Every night was a test, but as long as I ignored the calls, I didn't have to hear what it said. The phone still rings. I still pass by that booth every night. It's still there with its dirty glass and chipped paint. I don't answer anymore. I keep my head down, do my job, and keep moving. I don't tell anyone about it. I don't try to break it again. I just accept that it's there, ringing, whispering with no one listening. If I don't pick up, it can't get inside my head again. It can't force me to hear those voices. So I keep walking. It rings, I walk, and that's it. I go home in the morning tired and uneasy, but I'm still here. No one else knows. And that's how it stays. I remember the day I first hung that old oil portrait in my office. I had found it at a small antique store. It was cheap, and I needed something to fill the bare wall behind my desk. The painting showed a man I did not know, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his eyes painted dark and cold. He did not smile. He looked straight ahead, almost as if he were sizing me up. His face had hard lines. His hair looked tidy, his shoulders stiff. At the time, I shrugged and placed him there without thinking much about it. It was just a decoration, something to cover empty space. I had no strong feelings about it. That changed a few days later. I was sitting at my desk, working through some paperwork. My office is quiet most of the time. There's no chatter, no background music. I work alone. My routine is simple. I arrive, turn on the lights, sit, and work until evening. I drink a cup of coffee around midday and eat lunch outside. Then I come back, finish my tasks, and leave. Nothing strange ever happened in that room until I hung that portrait. On the third day after putting it up, I noticed something that made my stomach feel tight. The portrait seemed slightly tilted. I always hang frames straight. I do not leave them crooked. The line of the top edge was off by a tiny margin, maybe only a few millimeters, but it was enough to catch my eye. I got up, stood on a chair, and adjusted it. I pressed it against the wall and checked with my eyes. It looked straight. I stepped down and returned to my desk. When I looked up again, the man's gaze seemed different. He appeared to be looking more to the left than straight ahead. I stared at the painting for a while, trying to see if I was imagining things. The pupils seemed shifted, as if the painter had caught the man in the middle of a glance. I told myself that the painting was old. Maybe the paint had worn unevenly. Maybe it always looked like that, and I just had not noticed before. I went back to work. A few hours later, I left the office to use the restroom. When I came back, the portrait looked off-center again. It was now slanted the other way. It was not a big movement. Someone else might not have noticed it, but I pay attention to details. My job requires it. I walked over and straightened it again. As I fixed it, I felt a strange chill on the back of my neck. The frame was smooth and the nail in the wall was solid. There was no breeze, no vibration from outside. There was no reason for it to move on its own. I said nothing, but I felt uneasy. Over the next few days, I kept noticing small changes. The man's head seemed to turn slightly from one day to the next. Sometimes he looked as if he were leaning forward in the frame. Other times, I would have sworn he had pulled back. His eyes seemed to follow me in a way that felt too direct. Paintings sometimes give an impression of following a person's movements, but this felt different. I began avoiding direct eye contact with the portrait. I would leave the office and come back, hoping not to see a change, but I always found something off. Sometimes the entire frame would be a few centimeters to one side, as if it had inched along the wall. Other times, the corners of the canvas seemed to stretch outward slightly. At night, when I worked late, I began to hear sounds. They were faint. A soft scratching noise seemed to come from behind the painting. It sounded like nails scraping against a hard surface. I put my ear close to the wall, holding my breath. The scratching paused, then started again, slow and careful. My heart pounded. I did not know what to do. I thought about taking the painting down, but something about it made me hesitate. I did not like touching it. The frame felt odd in my hands, as if it resisted my grip. I decided to ignore it for a while. I tried to focus on my work, but I kept looking up at that stern face. The man's eyes looked darker, his lips pressed tighter. I had the impression he was judging me. It felt ridiculous to think that way. It was just paint on canvas. But the sensation was too strong. I found myself checking behind me, looking at the corners of the room, making sure I was alone. I turned on an extra lamp and kept the lights bright. One afternoon, I got frustrated. I grabbed the painting and took it down from the wall. I carried it to a closet in the hallway. I planned to store it there and forget about it. The frame felt heavier than it should. It strained my arms. I opened the closet door, placed it inside, and closed the door quickly. I dusted off my hands and returned to my office. Without the painting, the wall looked empty and harmless. I felt relieved. The next morning, I came back to the office feeling better. I was sure that the strange sensations would be gone. But when I entered the room, I froze. The painting was back on the wall. It hung in the exact same place as before. I felt my throat tighten. I could barely swallow. There was no one else with a key to my office. I always lock the door. I checked the lock and it was intact. I stood there in silence, staring at the painting. The man's eyes seemed to meet mine. He looked even more severe now. I could see more detail in his face. His eyebrows were sharper, his cheeks more pronounced. The corners of his mouth bent downward, as if he was disappointed in me. I tried to speak, but I had nothing to say. I paced around the room, checking for signs of a break-in. Nothing else was out of place. Just the painting, hanging there as if I had never moved it. I approached it slowly. I touched the frame. It felt warm. I pulled my hand back. I felt sweat on my palms. I did not bother trying to remove it this time. Instead, I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I needed to calm down. I went to the restroom and splashed water on my face. The cold water felt good. I took a few deep breaths and then returned to my office. This time, the painting was slightly tilted again. The man seemed to be leaning forward, closer to the glass surface of the frame. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My chair squeaked as I sat down. I tried to work, but my eyes kept drifting to that face. I read the same line of my document over and over, not absorbing the words. That night, I stayed late. I do not know why. I think I wanted to face whatever was happening. I turned off the overhead light and turned on my desk lamp. The rest of the room fell into shadow. The painting was on the opposite wall, lit only by a small angle of light. I could see the shine of the painted eyes. I sat very still, waiting. The building was quiet. I heard the distant hum of something mechanical, maybe the heating system. My breathing sounded too loud. My throat felt dry. I considered leaving, but I stayed. Around midnight, the scratching started again. At first, it was a soft tap-tap-tap sound. Then it became a slow scrape, like a sharp object dragged across the wall. I stood up. My legs felt weak. I held my desk lamp in one hand and moved closer. The scratching stopped as I approached. I reached out and touched the frame lightly with my fingertips. The wood vibrated under my touch. It felt as if something inside the wall was pushing against it. I pulled my hand back. I stepped away and tried to think clearly. I decided to remove the painting again, but this time do something different. I took it off the wall carefully. The room felt colder immediately. I looked at the back of the canvas. There were old nails holding it in place. The wood backing looked normal. I ran my hand along it. It felt solid, no hidden compartments, no strange stains. I walked down the hallway with the painting in my hands. I reached the building's storage room. I grabbed an old blanket from a shelf and wrapped the painting in it. Then I slid it into a cardboard box and taped it shut. I wrote on the box with a marker, "Do not open." I carried the box down the stairs to the basement. The basement was cold and dim, lit by a single bulb. There were metal shelves full of old files and furniture. I placed the box in a dark corner behind some old chairs. I stood there for a few moments, breathing hard, feeling the concrete floor under my feet. I thought that would be the end of it. The next day I came into my office late. I felt nervous about what I might find. The wall was empty. There was no painting. I almost laughed with relief. I sat down at my desk and started to work. By lunchtime, I had relaxed enough to feel hungry. I ate a sandwich, drank coffee, and checked some emails. The day passed with no strange events. I went home feeling tired but calmer. A few days went by without incident. I started to believe I had solved the problem. Then on a Friday night, I decided to stay late again to finish some paperwork. Around 10 in the evening, I heard a noise in the hallway. It sounded like something heavy scraping along the floor. I froze and listened. The sound moved closer. I turned off my desk lamp. I listened to my own heartbeat. The door to my office was shut. I saw the doorknob move slightly. It jiggled, then stopped. The scraping sound continued, passing by my door, heading toward the storage room. After a while, it faded. I waited a long time before opening the door. The hallway was empty. The storage room door was open. I know I had closed it. I walked over, holding my breath. Inside, I found old files scattered on the floor. The cardboard box that held the painting was torn open. The blanket lay on the ground, shredded at the edges. The painting was gone. I checked everywhere and found no trace of it. My body felt heavy. I went back to my office and locked the door. I spent a few minutes sitting in my chair, staring at the empty wall where the painting had once hung. I thought about leaving the building right then, but I wanted to understand what was happening. I did not want to just run away. I pulled my desk away from the wall and inspected the spot where I had hung the painting. The nail was still there, firmly anchored. The wall felt smooth and solid. I knocked on it, expecting some hollow sound, but it was just a normal wall. I sat back down and turned on all the lights. My eyes stung from the brightness. I checked the closet, the restroom, the hallway. Nothing. I decided to bring my laptop and work from home for a while. I packed my briefcase and left the building, double-checking that I locked the office door. Over the next week, I did not return. I sent emails to colleagues and handled business from home. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe I was mistaken. But I could not explain what I had seen. Finally, after days of restless sleep, I decided to go back during daylight. It was a bright afternoon when I stepped inside the office again. I was sweating before I even reached the door. My hands were shaking a little. I unlocked the door and entered. The painting was back. It hung exactly where it had been before. The man's eyes looked straight at me. He looked closer to the glass surface now, as if he had moved forward. I could see tiny cracks in the paint, tiny details in his pupils. I backed away until I felt the doorknob against my spine. I considered leaving right then and never coming back. But this was my office. I needed to work. I walked slowly up to the painting. I pressed my palm against the frame. It felt warm again. I put my ear close to the surface. I listened. I heard a faint tapping sound coming from inside the wall. It was steady and slow. I pulled back and ran my fingers through my hair. My mouth felt dry. I tried to speak. I said, "Stop." My voice sounded weak and nervous. I tried again, louder. "Stop it. I'm not afraid of you." I heard only silence in return. I grabbed a chair and stood on it, reaching for the top of the painting. I tried to lift it off the nail again. As I touched it, I felt resistance. It would not budge. I pulled harder, using my weight. Eventually, it came loose, nearly knocking me off the chair. I climbed down and carried it out of the room. It felt heavy in my arms. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to an unused supply closet. There was no lock on this door. I placed the painting inside, face against the wall. Then I blocked it with a small cabinet. I backed out of the closet and closed the door. I returned to my office, breathing heavily. The wall was empty again. I felt a strange relief. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen, forcing myself to read emails, to write replies, to type numbers into a spreadsheet. Every few minutes I glanced at the door, expecting it to open, expecting to see that painting slide back in. But nothing happened. Hours passed. I left the office at dusk, checking behind me as I walked down the hallway. Everything seemed normal. That night, I slept better. I did not hear scratching in my dreams. I still felt tense, but at least I had locked the building behind me. In the morning, I will go back and I will see if the painting is still in that closet, facing the wall. Maybe it will be gone again, maybe not. I do not know. All I know is that I have done what I can. I have tried to remove it, to lock it away. If it returns, I will do it again. I will not let it hang there, staring at me, making me feel trapped. I will not allow it to move freely. I will keep trying to contain it no matter how many times it comes back. If I can't, I'll leave this office and never return. I don't want to see that face again. I don't want to feel those eyes on me. I just want to work in peace. I stand at the top of the basement stairs with my flashlight aimed downward. The single bulb overhead is weak and flickers sometimes. I moved into this place last week. I signed the lease and got the keys from a landlord who barely spoke. When I first opened the basement door, I noticed old paint chips on the steps and a damp smell. But I didn't spend time down here. I left a few boxes and went back upstairs. That changed tonight when I heard noises. I'm standing here now because I can't ignore what I've heard for the past 2 nights. It's after midnight. I'm still dressed in my jeans and a long-sleeve shirt from earlier in the day. I hold a flashlight because the basement light is too dim and I want something brighter. I take a step down, then another. The steps creak. I smell that damp, musty odor from before, but tonight there's something else. It's a bitter smell, like metal and dirt. My throat feels dry and my hands feel slightly cold. I keep going down until I reach the bottom. Down here, the air is heavier. The concrete floor is uneven. On my left, there's an old shelf with paint cans and rusty tools. On my right, a stack of old wood planks. Directly ahead is the door. It's not just any door. It looks thick and has reinforced hinges. Heavy metal chains run across it, and there are at least 2 padlocks. The chain links are not fresh and shiny. They have a dark brown color and the metal edges look rough. The door frame has scratches as if someone tried to force it at some point. I notice splinters around the edges. I stand a few feet back and aim my flashlight at the door. Nothing moves. The sound I heard last night was faint. It came through the floorboards while I was trying to sleep. It sounded like a scraping noise, followed by something soft, like a muffled voice. I ignored it. This evening I heard it again, but louder. This time I thought I heard breathing, a slow, rough breathing. I waited, thinking maybe it was a pipe or an animal, but I could not shake the feeling that someone or something was down here. I walked closer to the door. I moved slowly. My breath feels shallow. My heart beats hard in my chest, and my stomach feels tight. I raise the flashlight and let the beam run across the chains. I see small bits of rust flaking off. The smell gets stronger as I approach. It's like old iron and wet soil. I notice the floor near the door is slightly damp. I shift my footing and feel a slight stickiness. I look at the ground. The surface is uneven and has a brownish discoloration. I can't tell what it is. It doesn't look like paint. It's dry on the surface but smells foul. I listen. I stay quiet for several seconds, focusing my hearing on whatever might be behind that door. I pick up a faint sound. It's like something dragging lightly against wood. It stops, then starts again. Then I hear a low, guttural exhale. It's not loud, but it's there. I can feel my skin tightening at the back of my neck. My jaw clenches. The door itself looks thick, made of some kind of old hardwood. The metal plating on it is dull. The padlocks are large. I don't have keys for them. The landlord never mentioned this door. I never asked. I just assumed it was a storage area, or maybe it led to some old sub-basement. But now I see no sign of a normal latch or knob, just heavy hardware. I place my free hand on one of the chains. It's cold and rough. When I give it a slight push, the chain rattles. At the same time, I hear a sudden scratch from behind the door. It happens right as the chain rattles. I freeze. I feel a cold sweat on my forehead. I don't move the chain anymore, and the noise stops. I notice my breathing is louder now. I force myself to stay calm and quiet. I move the flashlight beam along the edges of the door, looking for gaps or holes. I see a small crack near the top hinge, but it's too dark inside to see anything. I smell the same foul odor through that crack. My eyes water a bit. I wonder if the landlord knows about this. I think about leaving it alone and going back upstairs. But I'm here now, and the noise won't let me rest. I shift my weight and run my hand along the edges of the doorframe. There's a slight vibration in the wood, as if something behind it is pressing or leaning against it. It's subtle, but real. I whisper a few words to myself, saying that I just need to know what's inside. I don't want to break anything yet. I look around the basement again, aiming the flashlight at the shelves in the corners. I see old boxes, some pipes along the ceiling, and a toolbox on the floor. I approach the toolbox. It's dented with chipped paint. Inside, I find a few tools. A hammer with a worn handle, a flathead screwdriver, pliers, and a heavy-duty crowbar. The crowbar catches my attention. I lift it out of the box. It feels solid. I think about using it on the door. The locks are old. Maybe I can pry the chain anchor loose or break the hinge, but I need to be careful. I don't know what's on the other side. I consider calling someone, but who would I call at this hour, and what would I say? I can't think of anyone I trust enough to explain this strange problem. I feel a bit uneasy asking the landlord about it. He seemed distant and uninterested when I moved in. The scratching returns, this time more rhythmic. It's a steady scrape, pause, followed by a rough, quiet grunt. I clear my throat. My mouth feels dry. I take a step toward the door again. I tap the crowbar lightly against my leg, thinking. The locks look sturdy, but the door frame looks old. I might not even need to break the locks if I can wedge the crowbar in where the door meets the frame and pry it open. The chain is wrapped through some metal brackets on the frame, but maybe the wood is weak. I kneel down and press my ear near the lower part of the door. The smell hits me harder here. It's not fresh. It reminds me of old water and rusted metal. I can hear a soft scraping right against where my ear is placed. I feel my heart pound harder. I imagine a set of fingernails or claws on the other side. I can't see anything, but I picture something pressed against the wood. I want to back away, but I also want to solve this now. I feel a tension in my legs. They want to move. I'm sweating under my shirt. I stand up and grip the crowbar tightly. I slide the flat end between the door and the frame near the middle hinge. I push. The wood creaks a bit, but doesn't give. I try again, putting my weight into it. My arm muscles tighten. I hear a small crack. I stop and listen. The noise behind the door changes. I hear a low, rough sound, almost like something pushing back. The chains rattle slightly, even though I haven't touched them. I feel the crowbar slip a bit, scratching the surface. I adjust my grip and try again, focusing on the hinge area. This time I apply more pressure and feel the wood splintering slightly. I pause again. I have no idea what I'm about to set free, but I can't leave this door locked up without knowing. The tension is driving me crazy. I can't sleep upstairs while something is down here. I push the crowbar harder. The hinge area cracks again. Tiny splinters fall on the floor. My flashlight beam wavers as my arm moves. I reposition the crowbar near the top hinge. The metal scrapes loudly. From behind the door, something hits the wood. It's a dull thud. I jump back and hold the crowbar ready like a weapon. I wait. My breathing is loud. My chest feels tight. I shine the flashlight at the door. Nothing moves. I try to calm down and think. The door must have something heavy leaning against it. Maybe a large piece of furniture or something stored behind it. But I heard breathing. I heard a voice or something like it. Could it be an animal? A large dog trapped inside? The landlord never said anything about pets or anything locked away. But what if he left something down here and never told me? I grip the crowbar and go back in. I wedge it near the bottom hinge this time. I push with my legs and arms, straining. The wood around the hinge begins to tear. I feel the door shift slightly. The chains go tight and rattle. I hear a rough breathing from the other side. It sounds closer now. It sounds angry or desperate. I feel sweat on my forehead again. My hands feel clammy on the crowbar's handle. I push again and the hinge area cracks. I manage to loosen it enough so the door can move slightly, even with the chains on. I step back and try to look through the new gap. It's small, maybe an inch wide. I shine the flashlight through it. I see darkness and a shape that doesn't reflect much light. It looks like a rough surface, maybe fabric or dirty wood. I smell that foul odor again, stronger now. I try to shine the light at different angles. Suddenly I see something move in that gap. It's quick, I can't make out details. It might be a hand. It's pale and dirty. I see rough, thick fingernails. Then it disappears from the gap. I hear a low growl, deep and strained. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. I lean back, holding the flashlight with one hand and the crowbar with the other. I think about what to do next. The door is still locked up by chains, but I've weakened one side. I can try to pry the chain mounts off the wall. I look at the brackets holding the chains. They are screwed into the concrete wall. That won't be easy to remove. I could try to break the padlocks with the crowbar, but that might take too long. I look around for something else. I see a heavy hammer on the shelf. I grab it. The handle is solid and the head looks heavy enough. I place the flashlight on the ground, angled so it lights up the door. I hold the hammer with one hand and the crowbar with the other. I try to hammer the crowbar into the gap near the latch area, hoping to break the door loose. Each hammer strike echoes in the basement. The door shakes. The chains pull tight. I hear frantic scratching from behind the door. The thing behind it is reacting to my attempts. It sounds upset, scraping faster and making rough breathing sounds. My throat is dry. My eyes sting from the smell. My back aches from the tension. I hit the crowbar again. The wood splinters more. A larger gap opens. I see movement inside. There is a figure. It looks human, but I can't be sure. The skin is pale, covered in dirt. The eyes reflect the flashlight beam. They are wide and dark. The figure pulls back. I see a hand reach out through the gap. The fingers are thick and calloused. The nails look cracked and dirty. The hand grasps the wood, pulling at it, trying to widen the gap. I feel panic rising in my chest. I hit the crowbar again, trying to knock it loose completely. The door shifts an inch or two inward. The chains hold. The figure inside pushes against the door, making it rattle. The padlocks strain, but they hold firm. I back away and pick up the flashlight again. I shine it at the gap. The figure backs away from the light, making a raspy sound. I look at the hinges I weakened. One hinge is nearly off. The other two are still in place but warped. If I can break another hinge, I might pull the door free even with the chains. I try to think if that's a good idea. If I open the door, I'm face to face with whatever is inside. If I leave it, I'll never know. But I can't sleep tonight if I leave this thing locked up and angry. I approach again and wedge the crowbar near the middle hinge. I strike it with the hammer. The wood cracks louder this time. The hinge bolts loosen, the door shifts again, and the chains jolt. I hear that rasping noise from behind the door. It's frantic now. I see the hand again. It reaches through the gap, scratching at the air. I take a step back. The hand tries to reach me but can't. The gap is still too narrow. I see dirt under the nails and patches of dried mud on the knuckles. The fingers flex, then withdraw. I move the flashlight slightly to see more inside. I catch a glimpse of a shoulder covered in tattered cloth. The cloth looks old and stiff. I try to say something, but my throat is tight. I manage a few words, asking who is there. I get no response, just a rough grunt. I ask again. The figure only makes a dragging sound against the door. I think about the possibility that this is a person stuck inside. Maybe they have been trapped. But I don't see any clear sign of injuries or anything like that. They seem strong. The way they grab at the door suggests strength. The odor in the air makes me lightheaded. I just want to solve this. I decide to stop prying. I set the hammer down and step back, breathing hard. The figure behind the door has noticed I stopped. I hear quieter breathing now. I shine the flashlight at the door and see the gap I made. The door looks ready to come free if I apply more force. But I'm not sure I want to do that. I stand there for a moment, holding the crowbar. My hands ache from gripping it. My shoulders feel stiff. The figure inside makes another sound, softer this time. It sounds like a muffled attempt at speech, but I can't make out words. I consider leaving and calling the landlord in the morning. I consider calling someone else for help. But right now in this basement, with the door partially broken, I don't feel safe. I can't pretend this isn't happening. I know there's something inside, something that responds to my presence. It moves, it tries to reach me, it makes sounds that are neither friendly nor purely animal. I look around the basement one more time. I see no other doors, no windows, no signs that anyone else has been here recently. The dust on the shelves is thick. The floor is damp. The smell of rust and earth fills my nose. I hold the flashlight steady and watch the gap. The figure inside shifts position. I see a shoulder and part of a face now. The face is dirty with scruff along the jaw and tangled hair. The eyes are open wide, unfocused, reflecting light. The figure breathes through the mouth, making a harsh, uneven sound. I say hello again, louder. No reply. I try to push the door again, just a little. The chains pull tight, stopping me. The figure presses back and I feel resistance. I let go. I think about what to do next, but I can't decide. My heart is still pounding and I feel a drop of sweat run down my temple. The basement is silent except for the figure's breathing and the faint creaking of wood. I realize I've spent a long time down here. I'm exhausted and my mind is racing. I decide to back away, go upstairs, and think. I can block the basement door from my side. I can try to talk to the landlord in the morning. I step backward slowly. The figure inside doesn't reach out this time. I keep my flashlight on the door until I reach the bottom of the stairs. Then I turn and climb up, one step at a time. My legs feel shaky. When I reach the top, I close the basement door. I lock it and slide a heavy chair in front of it. I stand there in my hallway, breathing hard, staring at the closed door. I can still smell that odor on my clothes. I hold the crowbar and the flashlight in my hands. I haven't solved anything, but at least I know what's down there. Something. Someone. Alive. Waiting. I'll have to deal with it, but not right now. Not tonight. I first noticed the figure about 2 weeks ago, just after midnight, when I got up to get some water. I stood at my bedroom window, looking down at the yard, and saw someone tall in a dark cloak standing by the single tree out there. The street lamp near the fence was weak and flickered sometimes. Every time it flickered, the figure's head seemed to shift a few degrees, and it was always facing the window, but never in a way that let me see its face clearly. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in my chest and a dry sensation in my mouth. My shoulders were tense, and I wondered if I should call someone, but I just stared. The figure stayed until I gave up and went back to bed. The next night, I checked the window again around the same time. It stood there in the same spot. It did not move in any obvious way. It did not speak. It did not produce any sound. The air outside looked cold, and I could see that the grass had a slight sheen as if damp. I did not open the window. I stood behind the glass and watched. When the street lamp flickered, the figure seemed to shift its stance like it had moved its weight from one leg to the other. I tried to catch it in the act of moving, but the shift always happened in the instant of darkness when the lamp blinked. When the light came back, the figure's position had changed just a little bit. My pulse was a bit faster than usual. My neck felt stiff. On the third night, I did not want to look, but I did. It was there again. My stomach felt tight, and I noticed that I was taking shallow breaths. The floorboards under my feet were cold. I could see my reflection in the window. I looked tired. I felt a small twitch in my eyelids. I tried to open the window a crack to hear if there was anything outside. I heard nothing but a distant hum from the street. No cars were passing, no voices, no dogs, just a low hum of distant traffic many blocks away. The figure remained still. I closed the window again. That night I turned off all the lights in my room and watched in the dark. The figure still did not move in a normal way. It was always the flicker of the lamp. I tried to leave for a moment, hoping to catch it off guard. When I returned, it was still there, slightly closer to the tree trunk than before. My hands were sweating, and I wiped them on my pajama pants. I started to think about calling the police, but what would I say? That someone was standing in my yard, not doing anything, not breaking anything, not threatening me in a direct way. I decided to wait one more night. On the fourth night, I watched longer. I watched for nearly an hour. My legs got tired, and I dragged a small chair to the window. I sat and stared. The figure stood there the whole time. No changes except those tiny shifts during the lamp's flickering. I got a small flashlight from my nightstand. I tried shining it out the window. The figure's outline looked a bit clearer. I could see that it wore a long, dark garment, maybe a coat or a cloak. I could not see any details on the face. The head was tilted slightly downward, and the hood, or whatever it was wearing, cast a shadow. The shoulders were broad. The height was maybe around 6 feet or a bit more. I turned off the flashlight. After a few minutes, the lamp flickered again. The figure's angle changed again, just a fraction. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I felt my heart rate pick up. I got up and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. My throat felt dry and tight. I decided to call a friend the next day. I told him what I saw, and he said maybe it was just some neighbor messing around. Maybe I should ignore it. I thought about this, but I knew it was not normal. There was something off about the figure's stillness, the silence, the way it never let me see its face. My friend said he would come over that night. We agreed that he would arrive around midnight and we would both look. I felt relieved. Maybe with someone else there, I would feel less nervous. That night, I waited with my friend in my living room. I did not turn on many lights. We whispered to each other. When midnight came, we walked upstairs to my bedroom. I pointed to the window. The figure was there again. My friend looked at it. He mumbled something under his breath. He said it was strange. He tapped on the window lightly. No response. The figure remained still. My friend turned to me and shrugged. I told him about the flickering light. Just as I said it, the lamp outside flickered. We both stared. The figure's position changed slightly. My friend asked if I saw that. I nodded. He said this was too weird. He wanted to go outside and check. I told him I was not sure about that. I felt a tightness in my chest, but he insisted. He said he would just stand on the porch and see if the figure did anything. I followed him downstairs. We walked through the hallway and opened the front door. The air outside was cold. My friend stood near the door. He did not go into the yard. We could see the figure in the distance. It did not move. My friend called out, "Hey, what are you doing there?" No response. He called out again, louder. Nothing. My friend stepped a few feet onto the porch, holding his phone's flashlight. He aimed it at the figure. The light was weak at that distance. I stood behind him, my arms crossed, my stomach tense. The figure remained still. Then the street lamp flickered again. In that brief instant of darkness, I thought I heard a quiet rustling sound, like fabric moving. When the light came back, the figure had shifted again just a bit, facing us in a slightly different angle. My friend cursed under his breath and stepped back inside. We closed the door and locked it. My friend asked if I had any idea who that could be. I said no. He said maybe we should call the police. I agreed. I picked up my phone and dialed. The operator said a patrol car would swing by. We waited. About 20 minutes later, we saw a pair of headlights at the end of the street. A police car parked near my house. 2 officers got out. I watched from the window. I could see their flashlights shining around. I waited for them to come knock on my door, but they did not. They walked around the property line, shining their lights near the tree. They stayed there a few minutes. Then they came to the door. I answered. They said they saw nobody out there. They said there was no sign of trespassing. They asked if I had seen this person tonight. I said yes, I saw them just a half hour ago. My friend confirmed it. The officers seemed skeptical. They said the area was clear. I apologized. They left. After the police left, my friend and I went back to the window. The figure was back. It stood there as if it had never left. My friend's breathing sounded uneven. He said he did not like this. I felt sweat on my forehead. I felt a headache forming at the base of my skull. We decided to try to take a photo. I grabbed my phone and aimed it at the window. I zoomed in. The figure was too dark. I tried turning up the brightness. When I snapped a picture and looked at it, I could see the tree, the grass, the fence, but not the figure. It was just a dark blur. I tried again with my friend's phone. Same result. The figure did not show up clearly. It looked like a smudge or a shadow. My friend said he had to leave. He did not want to stay. He looked tired and on edge. I did not stop him. I watched from the window as he walked to his car. The figure did not move. My friend drove off. I locked all the doors, checked the windows, and pulled down the blinds. I sat on my couch. I tried to watch TV. I could not focus. My back was tense. My neck hurt. I got up and paced in the hallway. I heard the clock ticking. I stood by the front window for a while. Eventually, I went to bed, leaving the blinds in my bedroom down. I could not sleep well. I woke up a few times during the night, sweaty and uncomfortable. The next day, I felt tired. I had dark circles under my eyes. I felt nervous as the evening approached. I tried to keep busy, but I kept checking the clock. As midnight came closer, I went upstairs and lifted the blinds a few inches. The figure was there. I lowered the blinds again. I sat on the bed. My hands were shaking a little. I did not know what to do. I felt trapped in my own home. I breathed slowly, in and out, trying to stay calm. I could not hear anything unusual outside. No footsteps, no breathing, just silence. I got an idea. I decided to go out the back door, circle around quietly, and try to approach from behind. I wanted to see if I could catch the figure off guard. Maybe I could see its face, or at least confirm if it was a real person or something else. I put on dark clothes, a jacket, and some shoes with soft soles. I turned off all the lights in the house. I waited until the clock showed midnight. Then I opened the back door slowly. The hinges made a slight creak. I winced. I stepped outside. It was cold. I could feel the chill on my cheeks and inside my nose. I moved along the side of the house, staying close to the wall. The grass felt damp under my shoes. I reached the corner of the house and peeked around toward the tree. I saw the figure's back. It looked like a human shape wrapped in dark clothing that hung straight down. It did not move. I took a few slow steps closer, holding my breath. The street lamp flickered. In that brief darkness, I heard a soft swishing noise. When the light came back, the figure had turned slightly, as if aware of my presence. I froze. My heart pounded hard. My chest felt tight. I considered running back inside, but I stayed still and watched. The figure did not come closer. It did not run away. It just stood there. I took one more step. I tried to speak, but my voice came out shaky. I asked what it wanted. No answer. I asked again. My throat felt sore, and I noticed I was breathing through my mouth. Nothing happened. I could not see a face, just a dark shape of a hooded head. My fingers felt cold and stiff. I stepped sideways, trying to get a better angle. The lamp flickered again. This time, the figure's arm position changed. It looked like one arm rose by an inch or two. I backed up, stumbling a little on uneven ground. I turned and went back inside. I locked the door. I checked all the windows again. My hands were shaking more now. I felt sweat on my lower back. I went upstairs and looked out the bedroom window. The figure was there, same place, same stance. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning, I felt pain in my shoulders and neck, probably from tension. Over the next few nights, I tried different things. I tried shining a stronger flashlight from the upstairs window. I tried talking loudly. I tried ignoring it and not looking for several hours. The figure was always there, every night, after midnight, standing by the tree. It never spoke, never made a sound besides that faint swish of fabric during the lamp flicker. It never approached the house, it never left any mark. The grass under the tree did not show any footprints that I could see. I checked one morning. Just damp grass, no clear impressions. The presence of this figure changed my routine. I stopped going out at night, I stopped spending time in my backyard. I felt anxious as soon as the sun began to set. I avoided the window, but eventually I always ended up checking, just to be sure it was still there. It always was. The tension in my chest never went away completely. My arms and legs felt sore in the mornings, as if I had been tensed up in my sleep. I considered moving out, but that would take time, money, and effort. I tried calling the police again, but they found nothing each time. I tried inviting more friends over, but no one had any better suggestions. Some of them hinted that maybe I was seeing things, but I knew what I saw. My friend who came that night saw it too. The figure was real, at least visually. Maybe it was some strange person who had a way of moving silently and avoiding detection by police. Maybe it was something else. But I did not want to think about that. All I know is that every night after midnight I see it there. It stands under the single tree in my yard, facing my window in a way that prevents me from seeing its face, shifting positions slightly whenever the street lamp flickers, not making a sound, not coming closer, not leaving any evidence. I feel colder when it is there. The air feels heavy, and I sweat without reason. I cannot find a way to make it go away, and it has not stopped appearing, night after night, always in the same spot, always silent, always there. I hear the first creak right after midnight. I'm in bed trying to fall asleep, but the noise pulls me out of that halfway state. I open my eyes and hold my breath. The sound is soft but clear. It comes from beneath the floorboards, right under my bed. I know that space down there is almost nothing. There's no crawl space. There's no way anyone could fit there. But I hear slow, light footsteps. I hear short, scraping sounds. I stay still, pressing my palms flat against the sheets. I listen, waiting for something else. I don't turn on the light at first. I lie in the dark, focusing on each small sound. I feel a tightness in my stomach. My throat is dry. I reach for my phone on the bedside table and click on its screen. The glow of it lights up my hand and the edge of the mattress. I listen again. The sound repeats. A soft step, a light scratch, then a gentle but clear creak. I slide my legs off the bed and place my feet on the floor. I press down with my toes and feel the wood. It's solid. My apartment is old, but not so old that it should make random noises like this. I hold the phone down near the floor. I see nothing but the smooth boards. I sit there, squinting, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Then I hear a low whisper. It's muffled. I can't make out words. It sounds like someone talking through thick cloth, but it comes from below. The voice is strange, quiet, and constant. It doesn't stop. It's like a faint murmur that never pauses to breathe. My heart beats faster. The muscles in my neck feel tense. I swallow, but my mouth is dry. I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't feel right. I tap the floor with my finger. I tap it twice, softly. The whisper stops for a moment. Then I hear a thin, airy sound, like breath passing through cracks in old wood. It's colder near the floor. The temperature on my face feels normal, but when I lower my ear close to the floor, I feel a cold draft. It's as if there's a tiny vent or a crack leading outside. I lie flat on my stomach now, pressing my ear against the floorboards. They feel smooth and old. I can smell a faint odor, like damp earth. I don't know if that's my imagination or if the wood is letting some scent through. I hold my phone out to the side, letting its light skim over the floor. The voice starts again. It's not English. It's not anything I've ever heard. It has clicks and breathy sounds mixed in with hushed vowels. It never rises in volume. It stays at a steady low level, as if reciting something to itself. My chest tightens more. I feel sweat forming at the back of my neck. I think about leaving the room, but I don't want to lose track of whatever this is. I consider hitting the floor harder, making noise, maybe scaring it away. But I don't know what it is. I try a different approach. I speak in a low voice. Hello? I say. My voice sounds too loud in the quiet room. The whispering stops again. There's a soft shuffling noise, like someone shifting positions. My hand rests on the floor. I feel a slight vibration, like something moving below. The boards are thick, though. This shouldn't be possible. I think about checking beneath the building. My apartment is on the ground floor, and there's only a thin gap before the solid ground outside. I know the building's foundation is old, maybe uneven, but there's no basement, no crawl space, just dirt and concrete. Nothing that can hold a person. Still, something is down there. The voice returns with more urgency, speaking faster now. I press my ear harder. The words come out as short bursts, separated by small gasps. I feel something like a cool breeze touching my ear, but I can't find where it's coming from. I get up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knees. I'm still barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants. I walk quietly to the window and peek outside. The street is empty. It's a quiet neighborhood, and at this hour, nobody is around. I look at the floor near the edges of the room. Everything looks normal. I kneel down in one corner and run my fingertips along the baseboard. It's all sealed. No gaps large enough for any person. I tap lightly, solid. I stand up and return to the bed. I decide to turn on the overhead light. The sudden brightness makes me squint. I examine the floor closely. The planks are old and a bit worn, but intact. No loose boards. Nothing that would let a hand or even a tool slip through. Still, the voice continues when I listen closely. I sit down, legs crossed, and place my hand flat on the floor again. The voice reacts. It grows a bit louder. I can't understand it. It might be a language. The sounds repeat in cycles. Maybe it's repeating phrases. My body feels tense. I feel a slight tremor in my hands. My chest feels tight. I clench my jaw. I don't like this situation. I think about calling someone, maybe the building manager, but what would I say? That I hear a voice under my floor at midnight? It sounds ridiculous. I'm alone here. I need to figure this out myself. I place my ear down again. The voice sounds like it's right on the other side of the wood, but how can that be? I consider prying up one of the boards, but I have no tools on hand. The kitchen might have something. I walk out into the hallway and grab a flashlight and a flathead screwdriver. The hallway is quiet. The rest of the apartment is normal. The living room is dark and still. The kitchen faucet drips a little. I turn it off, then return to the bedroom with the screwdriver. I pick a plank that looks slightly worn at the edges. I insert the screwdriver tip and try to lift it. The wood barely moves. It's nailed down tight. The whispering voice keeps going, never raising its volume beyond a muffled hush. I try another plank. Same thing. Solid. My heart pounds. I try harder, pressing until my knuckles whiten. Nothing. I curse under my breath. I put the tool aside and focus on the sounds again. I wonder if there's some trick here. Could it be pipes or air currents making weird noises? But I know pipes don't talk. This voice has patterns and rhythm. It sounds almost human, except for the strange language. It doesn't sound electronic. There's no hum, no static. It's too organic. I lean down one more time. This time I talk again. I can hear you, I say quietly. I don't understand you. Who are you? I wait. The whispering pauses. There's a rustling sound. I feel a slight vibration under the floor. It's like something tapping from below, but not with a tool, more like with fingertips. The tapping comes in sets of 3. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I hold my breath. The cold draft against my ear intensifies. It makes my ear canal feel numb. Then the voice returns, and now it sounds more strained, as if struggling to push each sound through a tight space. I don't want to panic, but I feel my heart racing. My forehead feels warm. My fingertips are cold. I sit back and press my hands together, trying to keep steady. I try to think of something simple. If there's a voice, maybe there's some kind of hidden gap. Maybe part of the floor was poorly installed. Maybe there's a small chamber under there. It's an old building, so maybe something got sealed off. I decide to check the exterior wall outside my bedroom. I leave the room and step outside through the front door, keeping it unlocked. Outside, the night air is still. I use my flashlight on the ground. There's a thin strip of space between the building's foundation and the earth. It's maybe 2 or 3 inches high, not enough for a human head, let alone a whole body. I crouch down and shine the light. I see soil and some stones. Nothing unusual. I walk along the perimeter of my apartment, shining the light at every possible gap. I see nothing that explains the voice. I go back inside. I lock the door behind me. I feel a bit foolish now, but I still hear it. When I step into the bedroom, I notice the voice has changed its pattern again. Now it's slower, with longer pauses. I try to record it. I grab my phone, open the voice recorder, and hold it near the floor. I let it run for a minute. The voice continues. I stop the recording and play it back. I hear my own breathing, a slight crackle, and then a faint whisper. It's too soft to pick out the details, but it's there. This is not my imagination. I move to another part of the room and try listening there. Near the closet, the voice is weaker. Near the bed, it's strongest. I push the bed aside, sliding it a few feet away. The noise stays strongest in the same spot where the bed was. The floor looks uniform, though. I trace my fingertips along the edges of each plank, feeling for a gap. Nothing. I kneel and apply pressure, pushing down. The wood doesn't give much. The whispering continues, steady and calm now, as if reciting something that never ends. I speak again, a little louder this time. I can't understand you, I say, trying to keep my voice even. If you can hear me, give me a sign. I wait. This time, I feel a slight shift. The whispering stops, and there's a scratching sound, like nails on wood, light and careful. My shoulders tense. I grip the flashlight tighter. I keep looking at the same spot. If I had a crowbar or something stronger, I might try prying the plank up, but I worry about damaging the floor. I also don't know what I'd do if I open it and actually find something. I look at the time on my phone. It's past 1 a.m. The sound doesn't go away. I can't sleep through this. I sit against the wall, facing the spot on the floor. I try staying quiet for a while, just listening. After about 10 minutes, the whispering starts repeating certain sequences more often. It sounds like a chant. I feel myself getting frustrated. My breathing quickens. My throat feels tight. I can't relax with this happening. I try knocking on the floor 3 times, hoping to establish some kind of basic communication. I knock 3 times. The voice stops. After a pause, I hear 3 soft taps in return from below. My chest tightens more. I knock twice. It returns 2 soft taps. I feel sweat on my palms. There is something under the floor that hears me and responds. I don't know what it wants. I try a different pattern of knocks, something random. 4 knocks, then a pause, then 2 knocks. It pauses for a long moment before responding, but it responds with the exact same pattern. 4. Pause. 2. I feel my stomach twist. This thing can understand simple signals. I speak again, voice shaky. Who are you? I ask. The whispering resumes, ignoring my question. It sticks to its strange language. I get closer to the floor and whisper, I don't understand, I don't speak your language. I wait. The whispering slows, and then stops. The air feels colder. I press my ear down. I hear soft breathing now. Nothing else. It's as if the thing is right there, with only a thin wooden board between us. My mind races. I consider calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I hear a voice under my floor. They might come, but what would they find? If they break the floor open and find nothing, I'll look crazy. If they do find something, what then? But I can't just sit here all night. I decide to push it further. I say, I'm going to open the floor. My voice is firm, though I don't feel firm inside. I press the screwdriver into the plank again. The wood creaks slightly. The whispering gets louder, more urgent. I feel vibrations under my hand. I push harder, but the plank won't budge. I get up and look for something stronger in the apartment. I find a small hammer. Back in the bedroom, I wedge the screwdriver into a tiny seam and tap it with the hammer. The plank lifts a fraction of an inch. The whispering turns into a hiss, then stops. The air from below feels colder, almost like standing next to an open freezer. I try to lift the plank more, but it's secured with nails that don't come out easily. I lean in, pressing my knee down for leverage. The plank lifts another inch. I shine the flashlight into the gap. I see darkness and something like packed earth. There's barely any space down there. The whispering doesn't return. I listen carefully. I hear soft breathing. It's very close. My throat closes up. I can't see anything that looks like a person or an animal, just dark soil and a hairline gap. I try to speak again. I don't mean harm, I say. I'm just trying to understand. No response. I think about pushing the plank further, but I worry about cracking it. I sit back, breathing hard. My hands shake. The presence below is silent now. I wait a full 5 minutes, listening. Nothing. I only feel the cold air and smell that damp earth scent. I put down the hammer and screwdriver and lower the plank carefully, letting it settle back into place. The room is quiet except for my breathing. I wonder if I scared it away, or if it's waiting for me to leave. I turn off the overhead light, leaving only the flashlight. I listen again. Nothing. I whisper softly, "Are you there?" Silence. I lean down, pressing my ear to the floor. After a long pause, I hear a single faint tap from below. My stomach turns. I whisper, "I'm here." Another tap, softer. I close my eyes and try to steady my breathing. It's too late to call anyone now. I feel that I should leave the room, let this thing be. But I also want to know what's going on. I stay there listening for any more words. Nothing comes. Just that faint cold draft and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. I move my bed back to where it was, slow and careful. The floor squeaks a bit. Once the bed is in place, I stand still. The whispering doesn't return. I wait another 10 minutes standing in the dark. The silence makes me feel like I'm being watched. I can't shake off the feeling that if I lie down, the voice will start again. I don't want to lie on top of it. I decide to sleep in the living room tonight. I walk out quietly, taking my phone and flashlight. In the living room, I settle on the couch, covering myself with a blanket. I keep the flashlight in my hand. I try not to think too much. My body is tired. My eyes burn a bit from lack of sleep. I stay awake, listening for any sound from the bedroom. I hear nothing. The apartment is silent now. I don't feel safe, but I'm too exhausted to think of a better plan. I just lie there, tense and alert, until my eyelids grow heavy. Before I drift off, I think I hear a faint whisper again, but it might be my imagination. I clutch the flashlight and try to calm my breathing. I feel no warmth, no comfort, just the thin cushion under me and the vague scent of the night air through the window. Eventually, I can't keep my eyes open. I fall into a restless sleep, knowing that something impossible is right there under my floor waiting for me to return. I remember that night was quiet. It was after regular working hours. There were only a few people left in the building. I had been sitting at my desk for several hours. I was tired and my eyes felt heavy. I needed a break, so I stood up and stretched my legs. The fluorescent lights were still on, but most offices were dark. My floor was almost empty. I could hear only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of someone typing. I decided to use the emergency stairs to go up one floor. I sometimes did that when I needed a quick change of scenery before finishing my tasks. There was nothing special about these stairs. They were bland and a bit dusty, and I never saw anyone else using them. That night I pushed open the heavy metal door marked stairs on my floor and stepped inside. The light in the stairwell was dim. It always had fewer bulbs than the main halls. It smelled like stale air and cheap paint. My shoes made a dull sound against the concrete steps. I climbed slowly, one floor at a time. I wasn't rushing. I just wanted to clear my head. At that hour, the building was calm. I could hear my own breathing, steady and quiet. After I reached what I assumed was the next floor, I opened the door. I expected the usual corridor with a few vending machines, a copy room, and a small lounge area. That was the standard layout. Instead, I saw something else. The hallway I stepped into was darker and had walls painted in a different shade. They looked older with more cracks. The floor felt uneven beneath my shoes. The air smelled moldy, like something left too long without ventilation. The overhead lights were weak and yellowish. There were no signs of the familiar furniture or doors I knew should be there. I stood still for a moment and blinked. I thought I must have climbed one floor too many or made a mistake. I turned around to go back into the stairwell. The door I came through had no sign on it. The knob felt colder than before. I stepped back into the stairwell and started walking down to return to my original floor. I felt uneasy. My stomach was tight. My breathing grew shallow. I tried to ignore it and focus on counting steps. When I reached the floor below, I pushed the door open. I expected to find my floor. Instead, I faced a corridor that was completely unfamiliar. The lights flickered. There were small puddles of dirty water on the floor. The paint on the walls was peeling. There were exposed pipes near the ceiling, and some of them dripped. I could smell something bitter, maybe cleaning chemicals or old dust. I heard a slight buzzing sound from somewhere behind the walls. I closed the door behind me and checked my phone. It showed no signal. The time was still correct. I tried my flashlight app. The corridor was still there, looking the same, just a bit brighter under the phone's light. I looked around. There were no clear room numbers, no company signs, no carpeting like on my usual floors. I tried a door on the left side of the corridor. The handle felt rough, and when I turned it, it led into a small room with bare concrete floors. Inside were some scattered boxes and an overturned office chair with torn upholstery. The air inside that room smelled stale, like old cardboard. There was no window, no other exit. I stepped out and tried the opposite door. It was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I knocked lightly and listened. There was no response, just a hollow sound. I went farther down the corridor. My footsteps sounded loud. I was alone. There were no voices, no phones ringing, no distant chatter like in a normal office building. My chest felt tight. My hands were starting to sweat. The air felt thick. I decided to return to the stairwell again and try a different direction. Maybe I missed something. I turned back and walked toward the stairwell door. It took me longer to reach it than I expected. It felt like the corridor had stretched. After a few more steps, I found the door and opened it. I moved down several flights of stairs, counting them carefully this time. I expected that after going down a few floors, I would return to the lobby or at least to a known level. I opened another door. The new floor looked different again. This time the corridor was narrower with a low ceiling and flickering fluorescent tubes. The walls were painted a dull green, and the paint was chipping away. The air smelled damp. I felt something sticky under my shoe. I leaned down and touched the floor with my finger. It felt like some kind of old adhesive tape or residue. I wiped my finger on my pant leg. I kept moving. I tried several doors at random. Most were locked. Some opened onto small rooms or empty offices without furniture. Each room I checked looked abandoned. I saw stains on the walls and floors. I saw old light switches that did nothing when I flicked them. There were some abandoned desks, broken chairs, and dusty shelves. No personal items, no computers, no papers, just empty spaces. I searched for windows. The windows were locked, and some were covered in thick grime. I tried pushing on a window frame. It didn't give. The glass felt solid. I looked outside through one of them. I saw darkness and maybe a faint reflection of my own face. No city lights, no street below, just darkness. My breathing got heavier. I could feel my heart beating harder. My throat felt dry. I took out my phone again. No service. The battery still had power, but no one was reachable. I thought about calling emergency services, but without a signal, it was useless. I tried walking back to the stairs again. The door to the stairwell was still there, but as I went down, I reached another floor with the same kind of dull corridors. I tried going up again. Maybe I could reach the roof and find a way out from there. I climbed a few floors up. I was sweating despite the cool temperature. My shirt stuck to my back, my legs felt a bit shaky. I kept one hand on the railing to steady myself. The metal railing felt slightly damp. After about 3 floors up, I tried a door. It didn't open. I tried another one floor above. It opened, but it led to another corridor, slightly different but still unfamiliar. This corridor had a low humming sound from the lights. They were the old kind of fluorescent lights that buzzed. The floor tiles were cracked. I stepped carefully. I looked for a sign or a map on the wall. There was none. I found a door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, there was a small room with a single folding chair and a box of old cables. The smell in there was stale and dusty. I closed the door and moved on. I tried to stay calm. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. I tried to think about a logical explanation. Maybe I took the wrong set of stairs. Maybe this was a section under renovation. Still, the scale of it was strange. Every corridor looked abandoned. There were no tools, no workers, no equipment. I decided to mark the door frames with something to see if I was going in circles. I took out my pen and drew a small X on the frame near the stairwell door on one floor. Then I climbed up one floor and tried again. After going up 2 floors and picking a random door, I ended up in a corridor very much like the others. I looked for my mark. There was no mark there. This was a different place, or at least it appeared to be. My stomach cramped. My hands were shaking. I could feel the tension in my neck. My eyes stung from the stale air. I coughed a couple of times. My footsteps echoed. I called out, just to hear something other than my own breathing. "Hello?" My voice sounded weak. No response. I shouted louder. Still nothing. I entered another room. It had a metal cabinet and a broken lamp on the floor. I searched the cabinet. Inside, I found a stack of old folders without labels. They were empty. Just blank pages inside. It made no sense. I backed out of the room and continued along the corridor. The corridor turned a corner, and I followed it. I found another stairwell door. I tried it. It led back into the stairs. These stairs looked the same as before. Bare concrete steps, dim lights, and old metal railings. I went down several floors. I counted each floor carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the fourth floor down from that point, I opened the door. Another strange corridor, similar to the others. I felt frustrated and a bit dizzy. I needed water. My mouth was dry. I looked around for a cooler or a fountain. I found none. I hoped to find at least a sink. Eventually, I came across a small bathroom sign. The door was plain and brown. Inside the bathroom, there were 2 stalls, a sink, and a mirror. The sink worked, but the water ran rusty for a moment before it cleared. I let it run, then cupped my hand and drank a bit. It tasted metallic, but it was better than nothing. I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and tired. My hair was messy. I felt a slight tremor in my hands. I stepped back into the corridor and kept moving, trying doors and checking stairwells. I must have passed through at least 6 different corridors, some shorter, some longer. Some had old carpeting that smelled moldy. Others were bare concrete. All were dim and quiet. The quiet was the worst part. It made everything feel like a closed box. I tried to make some noise just to feel less alone. I tapped the wall with my knuckle. The sound was dull. I kicked a small piece of debris. It skittered along the floor. I dragged a chair out of a room into the corridor just to see if moving something around helped me feel less trapped. It didn't. I kept thinking about finding an exit sign or a door that led outside. I looked at the ceilings. Some panels were missing, showing pipes and cables. I tried pushing on one of these panels to see if I could climb up. It was too high, and even standing on a chair I couldn't get through. I didn't have tools. My phone was useless for calling out. I kept checking it. The battery was getting lower, but still had some charge. The time on the phone kept moving forward normally. I had been wandering for what felt like an hour or more. At some point, I decided to move in a single direction and keep going. Every time I hit a dead end, I would return and try another corridor. I hoped I would find a pattern or a clue. I came across a door that looked heavier than the others. It had a simple numeric keypad. I pressed a few numbers randomly. The keypad beeped but didn't open. I tried to pull the door, push it, but it wouldn't move. I hit it with my shoulder. It made a solid thump. No luck. I tried the stairs again, this time going all the way up. I climbed floor after floor until my legs burned. I must have climbed at least 10 floors. Every time I tried a door, I got a similar corridor. I couldn't see any identifying marks. The floor numbers on the stairwell walls were missing. The signs that usually said which floor we were on were blank or removed. The paint was old and chipped. Some lights hummed, some flickered. My breathing was loud. My heart felt heavy in my chest. I wiped sweat from my face with my sleeve. Eventually, I noticed a difference. One corridor had a small box on the wall that said, "Maintenance." I pried it open. Inside were some old keys, a screwdriver, and a flashlight that still worked, though it was dim. I took them with me, hoping they would help. I tried the keys on several locked doors. None opened. I used the screwdriver on a door hinge. It didn't help. The screws were worn and stuck. As I wandered, I came across a corridor with a slight draft. I could feel some air moving. It smelled slightly fresher. I followed that faint draft until I found a door that was slightly warped. I pushed hard. It creaked and opened onto a small storage room. Inside were some tarps, a broken ladder, and a window with a loose frame. I pushed the frame. It gave a little. I wedged the screwdriver into the side and pried. The frame started to shift. I pushed again, using the ladder as leverage. The frame popped out enough for me to see outside. I saw lights outside. They were faint, but they looked like city lights. I pushed the frame more. A piece of it fell off inside the room. I reached through the gap. I felt cool outside air. I could smell it. It smelled like the city at night, a mix of distant cars and damp pavement. I pushed more until I could fit my arm through. I pulled, trying to widen the gap. I kept working at it, ignoring the pain in my fingers and the strain in my arms. Eventually, I managed to create an opening big enough to squeeze my body through. I climbed onto the ledge and looked down. I saw a fire escape. I reached for it and grabbed the metal railing. I pulled myself out. I stepped onto the narrow landing and looked around. I saw the familiar alley behind my building. I heard distant traffic. I felt relief wash over me. My legs were shaky and my heart was still pounding, but at least I recognized where I was. I climbed down the fire escape slowly and reached the ground. I looked up at the window I had come through, but from down here it was hard to tell which one it was. The building looked normal from outside. The same concrete facade, the same rows of windows. The street lamps glowed orange. I stood there for a moment, breathing the fresh air and feeling my heart rate slow down. I felt sweat drying on my neck. I felt the slight breeze on my face. I checked my phone again. Now I had a signal. I considered calling someone, but what would I say? I just stared at my phone screen for a moment, then slipped it into my pocket. I walked to the front of the building, found the main door, and entered the lobby. The security guard at the front desk glanced up. He looked bored. He did not seem surprised to see me. The lobby looked normal. Polished floors, bright lights, the usual furniture. I took the elevator up to my floor. It worked as normal. I stepped out into the corridor I knew, with my office right there. My desk, my chair, my computer. Everything was in place. I sat down, feeling a slight tremor in my hands. I looked around. Everything seemed normal. The hum of the air conditioning was steady. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. I did not go back to those stairs that night. I just finished my work and left the building. From the outside, nothing had changed, but I remembered every detail of those corridors, the stale air, the locked doors, and the strange silence. I do not know what that place was. I only know that it was there, hidden behind those doors and stairs. I never saw it again. I never tried. That was enough. I step outside after lunch. The weather is calm. The air is cool. The trees behind my backyard don't move much. I see the small patch of forest about 30 yards behind my house. I feel a slight breeze against my arms and face. I have never paid much attention to that area. It's just a place with thin trees, a few patches of grass, some ferns on the ground, and a lot of dry leaves scattered around. It never seemed important. It's just a place behind my property line, a bit cramped, with branches crossing over each other and bushes that poke your ankles. There is a light wind passing through. I hear a low rustling. It doesn't seem strange at first. I take a few steps onto the uneven ground. The soil here is dark and moist. I hear the sound of my footsteps against some old leaves. The wind picks up a little bit. It's not loud. It's a gentle sound, a whispering sound. I don't think about it until I notice something odd. The wind is making a noise that sounds a bit like my name. It's not clear. It's like a few syllables that resemble it. My name is David. I keep hearing something like da-vid. It's not pronounced perfectly. It's more like wind passing through a narrow space, but I pick up those sounds. My heart beats a bit faster. I scratch the side of my neck and stand there, looking around. I don't see anyone. I can't see any birds that would mimic a voice. It's just the wind and the trees. The breeze moves across my face. The feeling is not just cold air. It's gentle and constant, like someone trying to get my attention by touching my cheek. I swallow hard. The temperature is not very low. It's not winter. Still, I feel a chill running down my back. My shoulders feel tense. My legs feel a bit stiff. I glance behind me. I can see the back of my house, the small wooden steps, and the door I left open. Everything there is normal. I turn around again. The forest ahead looks calm. There are no large animals. I see no deer, no foxes, nothing that would explain these sounds. The branches on the trees are thin, and some of them bend slowly as the wind moves through. They seem to shift toward a certain direction, like arms pointing. I try not to think about that in any fancy way. I just notice that these branches lean in one direction. It's not random swaying, it looks more like a steady angle. I take another step forward. I feel a lump in my throat. My breathing is shallow. My hands feel slightly moist with sweat. I clench my fists to steady myself. The wind whispers again. It makes that same broken sound. It's not a clear voice. It's not a word. But it reminds me of my name, and that bothers me. I feel like something wants me to move deeper into these trees. I look down at my feet. There are small twigs on the ground, some broken branches, a cluster of leaves. The soil is soft in some spots. I try to stay on firmer ground, but it's all uneven. My left ankle twists a little and I step carefully afterward. I move further in. Every few yards I stop and look around. The wind continues to come and go. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's a bit stronger. Each time it picks up, I catch a sound that makes me uneasy. I can't describe it well. It's a breathy, rasping sound that forms a shape close to my name. I keep hearing it. I don't know why I'm following it. I think I'm curious. I also feel like I can't just turn around and pretend nothing happened. I keep going. My ears pick up small sounds, leaves scratching against each other, a distant rustle of something moving between shrubs. I hear my own breathing and my own heartbeat. I feel each breath hitting the back of my throat. I try to breathe through my nose to stay quiet and calm. My legs feel tense. The muscles in my neck are tight. My shoulders ache. There is no one else around. I know my neighbors are not close by. They wouldn't hide back here. They're not that kind of people. This area behind my house is usually empty. As I push a few low branches aside, I see that the trees are getting a bit denser ahead. There is less sunlight. The top branches form a sort of canopy. I see patches of sky, but not a lot. The ground is covered with damp leaves and some small mushrooms. I smell earth and something like old wood. The air is cooler here. My nose feels a bit runny from the chill. I wipe it with the back of my hand. I keep moving. The wind sounds come and go. Sometimes I hear that odd whisper once every few seconds. Other times I have to wait maybe half a minute. But it's still there. I wonder if I should turn around. My back itches. I feel a pulse in my temples. I'm not at ease. I'm not panicking, but I feel an increasing sense of tension in my body. My stomach is tight. My legs feel ready to run. I look over my shoulder again. My house is out of sight now. I see only tree trunks and bushes. I note a large tree with a twisted trunk to mark my way back. I try to memorize the spot. I notice a thick root that sticks out of the ground, forming a kind of hook shape. That might help me find my way if I need to return. I keep moving forward. The branches in front of me are thin and dry. They scrape against each other with a faint clicking sound. Some of them bend when I brush past. I notice that when the wind comes from behind me, the branches ahead seem to tilt in one direction. It's as if the forest is suggesting a path. I don't know what's ahead. I don't see any obvious landmark. Just more trees, more shrubs, and some rocks. The sound of the wind intensifies. I swallow again. At one point, I hear a short, sharp crack to my left. I freeze. I hold my breath. My body tenses up. I look around slowly. I see a broken branch on the ground. Maybe it fell just now. I don't see any animals. I listen for movement. I only hear the faint whisper. My name seems to be there again. but not in a clear way. My palms are sweaty. I rub them on my pants. I realize I'm breathing faster than normal. My chest is moving more than usual. I try to slow down my breathing to stay alert. I continue forward. The ground starts to slope downward slightly. I have to watch my step. Some stones are loose. My feet push them aside. The soil is softer here, and I almost slip once. I spread my arms to balance myself. The wind picks up for a moment. It rushes past my ears. I feel the cold air on the back of my neck. I hear the sound again, a bit louder. It's like, dup, fight, and then it fades. I grit my teeth and keep walking. After about 10 minutes of moving carefully among these trees, I notice something different. The trees seem more spaced out here. There are fewer low branches. I see a patch of ground that looks cleared, like someone removed some of the debris. The leaves are not as thick on the ground. The soil looks disturbed, like something was moved or dragged. I kneel down and touch it. The soil is damp and loose. I lift a small clump and let it crumble in my hand. It smells like fresh earth. I don't see footprints. I don't see any tools or trash. It's just a cleared spot. Maybe an animal's bedding area. I don't know. I stand up. My knees feel stiff. I hear the wind again, behind me, to my right and to my left. It seems to come from all directions now. My ears pick up a whispering sound that shifts around. I turn my head from side to side, trying to locate it. I can't. My breathing is fast and shallow. I try to slow it down. I feel sweat on my forehead. I wipe it off with my shirt sleeve. I feel a cold sensation where the sweat evaporates. My neck hair stands up. I look up at the branches. They are thin and black against the light gray sky. A few leaves move slightly. The wind is soft at this moment, but it's still present. I try to figure out where it wants me to go. I feel silly thinking that the wind wants anything, but I keep looking around for any sign. I notice a cluster of bushes to my right that seem to form a narrow path. The branches there are parted enough for a person to walk through. It's tight, but not blocked. I decide to go that way. I push through the bushes. They scratch my arms. I feel small twigs poke my sides. One branch hits my face and I blink hard. I swallow the taste of my own saliva, which feels thick and salty. On the other side of these bushes, I find a small clearing. It's not large, maybe a few yards across. The ground here is covered in soft moss. I step on it and feel my shoes sink slightly. It's quiet in this clearing. The wind is softer. The whispering sound is quieter now, more distant. I turn around and see that the trees form a sort of ring here, but not a perfect one. There's an old stump in the center. It's low and wide. There is some lichen on it and a few ants walking across the surface. I approach the stump. I don't know why. I'm just compelled to examine it. I run my hand over the surface. The wood is damp. My fingertips get a bit dirty. I flick off the dirt and small insects. I hear a gust of wind pass overhead. My shoulders tense up again. I look around the clearing. I can see no signs of people here. It's empty. Just trees, moss, a stump, and some bushes. No obvious reason for the whispering. No sign of anyone calling my name. Yet I keep feeling this strange sensation that I was led here. I stand there for a while. I shift my weight from one leg to another. My feet are getting tired. My knees feel a bit sore from crouching and stepping on uneven ground. I lick my dry lips. The wind hasn't stopped completely, but it's not making that voice-like sound as often now. I wonder if I should try calling out. I consider it. I'm alone, and it feels odd. I clear my throat. My voice feels a bit shaky. I say, "Hello?" I listen. Nothing answers. I only hear a faint rustle as a small breeze moves through some leaves behind me. I try again, a bit louder. "Hello?" My voice cracks. I feel my throat tighten. No response. I lower my head and look at the moss. I can see small bugs moving between the strands. I step back and hit a loose branch on the ground. It snaps under my shoe, making a dull sound. My heart jumps for a second. My nerves are on edge. My body feels tense all over. I rub my neck. I try to calm down by breathing slowly. I inhale through my nose and exhale through my mouth. My chest still feels tight. I decide to move around the clearing's perimeter. I walk slowly along the edge, pushing aside a few small branches. I see a rock that has a strange shape. It's just a rock with a chunk missing, not smooth, just rough. I tap it with my fingernail and hear a dull sound. Nothing unusual. I see another cluster of ferns. Their leaves are green and damp. I touch one leaf. Water collects on my fingertip. I rub it off on my pants. I keep walking. The whispering sound returns, very faint, like a distant voice calling, "Da, the." I can't tell if it's real or if I'm just imagining it now. I feel frustrated. I feel confused. There is nothing here. I feel watched, but I see no one. My stomach growls softly. I realize I haven't eaten since lunch and I've been out here longer than I planned. The light is still good, but the sky looks a bit dimmer than before. Maybe it's just the canopy above. My feet hurt. My shoulders ache. I think about heading back, but I'm not sure which way leads home. I remember the twisted trunk and the hooked root. I just need to retrace my steps carefully. I go back the way I came. I push through the bushes again. The branches scrape my arms. I mutter under my breath. I move past the disturbed soil. I recognize a few rocks and a patch of mushrooms I saw before. As I walk, I notice the wind is behind me now, pushing me slightly forward. I try to ignore it. I pick up my pace a bit. My breath is still uneven. My thighs feel sore and my lower back hurts. I step on a twig and it snaps loudly. I flinch at the sound. My nerves are raw. I keep looking around, expecting something to jump out, but nothing does. I find the hooked root and the twisted trunk. It takes me a few minutes, but I manage to spot them. I sigh with relief. I follow this landmark. I step around fallen branches and keep my eyes on where I'm going. The forest remains quiet except for the occasional whisper of the wind. It doesn't say my name anymore, or at least I don't hear it. I focus on getting out. I step over a low branch that crosses my path. I slip once, but I catch myself. My ankle hurts a bit, but I can still walk. After about 15 minutes, I see a brighter area ahead. I push aside a few more branches and step into a patch of ground with more sunlight. I look up and see the back of my house through the trees. It's still there, unchanged. I exhale and roll my shoulders to release some tension. My breathing slows down a bit. I step onto the grass behind my house. I feel calmer. I look back at the forest. The trees are quiet. The wind is light, just a normal breeze. I can't hear anything unusual now. I go inside, close the door and lock it. I stand there in my kitchen, leaning on the counter. My heart rate slows. My arms feel tired. My legs feel heavy. I look out the window at the forest. It looks ordinary from here. The sky above it is clear. The branches barely move. I don't hear any voices or whispers. I just feel a dull ache in my muscles and a lingering tension in my neck. There is nothing else to see or hear. It's over. I sit down at my kitchen table and stare at my hands. They are a bit dirty from touching the soil. I rub them together. I feel the roughness of my skin. I wonder what I just experienced. I don't think about it too deeply. I just know I heard something strange. I felt something pushing me forward. I followed it. I didn't find anything. Now I'm back home, safe and tired. I open a bottle of water and drink. My throat still feels dry. I take a deep breath and look at the quiet backyard. There's a slight breeze, nothing more. It feels normal again. I noticed the problem right when I got home and walked toward my front door under the porch light. I had just finished parking my car on the driveway. It was late. The sky was clear, and there was a single old lamp mounted beside my front door. It gave off a weak yellowish light. I stepped toward it and saw my own figure stretch across the concrete. I saw my shoes, my legs, my torso, my arms, and my head. I stopped walking because something looked off. I blinked a few times and looked straight down at my shadow. It moved, but not the way I moved. It pulled its left arm up a bit while I stood completely still. It bent its head slightly to the left while my head stayed steady. I noticed my jaw clench. I took a slow breath. I forced myself to keep looking. I expected some kind of trick of the light. I thought maybe something was reflecting from a passing car or maybe an object behind me. I looked behind me. I saw no one, no cars, no movement. Just my yard, a low fence and a short bush. Nothing was moving. The lamp above was steady and quiet. I turned back and looked at my shadow again. It was just a black shape on the ground. I raised my right hand slowly. My shadow also raised a hand, but I saw a slight delay, as if it waited for me to finish before it copied me. When I lowered my hand, it lowered its hand a moment too late. My stomach felt tight. I looked down at my feet. I shifted my weight. My shadow did the same, but again a fraction of a second off. My forehead felt damp. My breathing was shallow. I stood there for about a minute, testing small movements. I lifted my arm, rolled my shoulders, tilted my head, took a small step forward, took a step back. The shadow always followed, but with a delay and sometimes an extra movement that didn't match what I was doing. Once I stood perfectly still and I saw my shadow move its head as if it was looking somewhere else. I didn't say a word. I just kept staring. My heart was beating fast. I wiped sweat from my palms on my pants. The air felt cool, but I felt heat rising in my chest. I decided to step back from the door and walk around the small front yard to see if maybe the angle of the light was causing something strange. I walked to the left side, and my shadow stretched across the concrete path. I stopped and saw it again tilt its head without me tilting mine. I stepped to the right side, and it somehow lifted what looked like a shoulder. I hadn't moved my shoulder. I couldn't understand it. I didn't think about it in any complicated way. I just felt a rising fear, like something was very wrong. My body felt tense. My knees felt weak. The hair on my arms stood up. I cleared my throat and walked closer to the door again. I wanted to go inside and turn on the hallway light. I stepped under the lamp, pulled my keys from my pocket, and looked down at my shadow. It was right beneath me. It moved slightly as I moved, but again the timing felt off. I tried to open the door. I held the doorknob with one hand and fit the key in with the other. I noticed my shadow's arm position. It didn't match mine. I was holding my key out in front of me. My shadow's arm looked bent at a different angle. It felt like watching someone stand under me, imitating what I did, but badly. I turned the key, opened the door, and stepped inside. The hallway light was off. I reached for the switch. The hallway lamp turned on, and I looked down. My shadow now stretched along the wooden floor. It was still there, obviously, but it behaved the same. I took a step forward and saw it follow. It was attached to me, but not perfectly synchronized. I watched its shape shift as I moved. It was my outline, but slightly distorted. I raised both arms in front of me. It did it too, but one arm was higher than the other, and I didn't raise them unevenly. I lowered them. It lowered them too, but again with a small delay. My mouth felt dry. My chest felt tight. I bit the inside of my cheek. I turned around and looked at the wall. I saw my shadow shift along the floor and stretch up the wall, but it never settled down. It seemed to adjust itself constantly, as if it was trying to find the correct position. I tried to speak, but I stopped. I didn't want to say anything. I moved into the living room. I turned on the lamp next to the couch. I looked at my shadow on the carpet. Its head shape seemed to bend forward. I didn't bend my head. I checked behind me to see if there was another light source that could cause some weird overlap. There was nothing new. Just my lamp and the overhead ceiling light. I tried to see if it would disappear if I turned off all lights. I walked over to the switches and turned everything off. The room went dark. I couldn't see much, just some faint shapes. There was some outside light from a distant street lamp filtering through the window blinds. In that faint light, my shadow reappeared on the carpet. It was weaker. but still visible. I moved my arm slowly, and it followed. This time it didn't just follow. It seemed to pause in mid-motion and then jerk into place. I felt a chill run down my back. I was standing there in the dark living room, with just a thin glow from outside. I tried to approach a corner of the room that was very dark, thinking the shadow would vanish completely if there was no light at all. I stepped into that corner. I leaned against the wall. The darkness was deep there. I looked down. I could still make out a faint shape of my shadow. It shouldn't have been possible. There was almost no light in that corner. Yet it was there, pressed close to me as if glued to my body but refusing to match my posture. I felt my hands tremble. I touched my face with one hand. My skin felt cold and slightly damp. I pressed my back against the wall. I wanted to understand what was happening. I decided to try something else. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. I aimed it at the floor. A strong white beam lit the wooden boards. I saw my shadow in sharp detail. It was a dark shape on the floor, but as I moved the flashlight around, it kept shifting and twisting. When I aimed the flashlight at different angles, the shadow contorted into strange outlines. I raised the flashlight up and my shadow stretched tall, but as I tried to keep my arm steady, my shadow's arm on the floor looked like it was twitching. I turned off the phone's flashlight. I swallowed hard. I wanted to sit down and think, but I also didn't want to lose track of this thing. I turned on the living room ceiling light again. The sudden brightness made me blink. I checked the shadow. Under the clear overhead light, it looked normal at first glance. It was just a silhouette under me. But when I took a deep breath and raised my arm again, I saw the same delay. I raised my left arm quickly. The shadow raised its left arm a second later. I lowered my arm. The shadow kept its arm raised for a moment before lowering it. I clenched my fists. My heart was pounding. My legs felt shaky. I stepped into the hallway and made my way to the bathroom. I turned on the bathroom light and stood in front of the mirror. I wanted to see if maybe I was imagining things. In the mirror, I could see myself in the bathroom behind me. I looked down at the floor. My shadow was there, cast by the overhead light. As I watched, it lifted its head shape before I did. I could see it on the floor. My actual head didn't move. It was like a glitch in reality. I gripped the sink with both hands, looked up at my reflection. I looked normal. The room looked normal. I turned my head to the right very quickly and then back to the mirror. My shadow on the floor responded after a delay. It turned its head shape when I had already stopped moving mine. I felt sweat trickle down my back. My throat felt tight. I stepped out of the bathroom and went into the kitchen. I turned on the kitchen light. I looked at the floor tiles. I saw the shadow again. I tried to ignore it and opened the refrigerator. The light from inside the fridge cast another angle of light on the floor. Now I had two light sources, the ceiling bulb and the fridge light. My shadow overlapped in a strange way. One part of it looked normal, the other part looked like it was bending. I closed the fridge door. The kitchen went back to the single overhead light. The shadow snapped back into its single shape. I saw a jerk in its movement as if it was adjusting itself again. My breathing was fast. I felt my pulse in my temples. I decided to try to get rid of it by turning off every possible light in the house and blocking any outside light. I went around shutting off lamps, overhead lights, and the porch light outside. I closed the blinds completely and pulled the curtains. I made sure there was almost no light inside. The entire house was dark. I stood in the center of my living room, barely able to see my hand in front of my face. I waited. It was so dark that I could only see vague shapes. I stepped closer to a crack in the curtain, where a small amount of light from the street came through. I looked at the floor. I could see a faint outline of my shadow again. It never vanished. It was always there. I moved my arm slowly. My shadow moved too, but again with a delay. I stood still. My shadow's head moved slightly as if it was scanning the floor or looking around. My head did not move. I stared at it, and I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. I wanted to test something else. I grabbed a chair from the dining area and placed it under one of the ceiling lights. I turned that light on, stood on the chair, and positioned the light directly above me. My shadow appeared directly beneath me on the floor. It looked up at me if a shadow can look. I waved my hand over my head. The shadow waved too, but the motion was sluggish and not precise. I jumped down from the chair and landed with a dull thump. My shadow showed me landing a moment after I'd already steadied myself. I paced around the living room. My steps were uneven. My legs felt heavy. I didn't know what else to do. I tried walking into different rooms again. In every room, under every light, the shadow behaved the same way. It stayed attached to me, but it never matched me perfectly. It always lagged behind or made extra movements I didn't do. I touched my arm, my chest, my face, checking if I was somehow hurt or sick. I felt normal. I listened for any sounds. The house was quiet. I heard my breathing, my heartbeat in my ears. The floor creaked slightly under my weight. The refrigerator motor hummed softly in the kitchen. Nothing else seemed strange. I moved to the front door again. I turned the porch light back on and looked outside. The front yard was quiet. I could see the shape of my car. I could see the fence and the bush. I looked down at my shadow on the concrete. It stretched long and thin. I tested it again by raising my arm. The shadow raised its arm too, but ended up holding it higher than I did for a split second. I turned around, and the shadow twisted in a strange way before settling behind me. Every action I took, the shadow failed to match it perfectly. I began to feel lightheaded. I took slow, deep breaths to steady myself. My hands were shaking slightly. I walked back inside and locked the door. I turned off the porch light. The hallway was dim now. I left only a small lamp on in the living room. I stood under it. My shadow on the floor was clear. I tried to ignore the irregular movements and just hold still. I wanted to see if maybe it would stop. I stood still for at least 5 minutes. I didn't move a muscle. During this time, I watched my shadow carefully. Even with me standing still, it shifted its head shape twice. It moved its shoulders once. I felt something in my stomach twist. I realized it wasn't just following me poorly. It seemed to have its own impulses. It never broke free from me completely, but it never felt like a normal reflection. The fear made my arms tremble. My chest rose and fell rapidly. I tried sitting on the couch. I pulled my feet off the floor and looked at my shadow on the rug. It stretched out across the floor. With my feet off the ground, I expected it to shrink or just form a shape under me. Instead, I watched it slowly bend one of its leg shapes at a strange angle. My legs were bent normally on the couch, but my shadow's leg shape looked twisted. I felt sweat on my forehead. I rubbed it away with the back of my hand. I got up and walked to the bedroom. I turned on the bedside lamp. My shadow spread across the wooden floor. I bent down to tie my shoelace, even though it was already tied, just to do something normal. I saw my shadow bend, too, but then it seemed to lift its arm as if reaching for something invisible on the floor. I hadn't lifted my arm. I stood up straight. My breathing grew faster. I looked at the window. The blinds were closed. I went and lifted one slat slightly, letting in a thin strip of outside light. My shadow now had 2 competing sources of light. It stretched in 2 different ways. One shape came from the bedside lamp, another from the streetlight outside. Both shapes overlapped. I saw the overlapping shadow jerk and shift as I moved. I stepped back. The double shadows were even worse. They danced around each other. They didn't line up. I closed the blinds and turned off the lamp. The room went dark, except for a tiny red light from my digital clock. In that faint light, the shadow remained on the floor near my feet. I could see it outline my form. As I bent my head down close to the floor, it bent too, but not at the same speed. I pulled my head up, and it lingered down for a moment before straightening. I realized I had spent a lot of time testing it. My shoulders felt stiff. My neck ached. I walked slowly to the living room again. I turned on a single lamp and sat in an armchair. My legs bounced with nervous energy. I stared at the floor. My shadow stretched from my chair to the coffee table. I watched it closely. I didn't know what else to do. I felt too afraid to sleep. I felt tired, but I knew I couldn't relax. I didn't trust that thing under me. I didn't trust the way it moved. I rubbed my eyes. I tried to think of a way to make it stop, but I didn't do anything complicated. I just sat there, breathing, feeling my muscles tense, my heart beating, my head throbbing slightly. The shadow remained there, always attached to my position. Every time I moved an arm, it moved too, but never correctly. Every time I shifted my foot, it followed late. Every time I tried to catch it in a normal pose, it would surprise me with a slight movement of its own. I felt trapped. I leaned forward and pressed my elbows on my knees. My shadow stretched forward too, but its head jerked to the side as it did. I pulled back immediately and sat up straight. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was late at night. I decided to stay awake until morning, hoping that maybe daylight would fix it. Until then, I sat there with the lamp on, staring at my shadow, and feeling my pulse pounding in my neck. I walked into the public library at around 11 at night. The place was almost empty, with just a few quiet people sitting in the reading area near the front doors. The ceiling lights hummed. I could hear my own footsteps on the old floor. I had been there many times before, usually during the day, but this time I wanted to find a specific reference book that I could never get my hands on during normal hours. I had asked one of the librarians earlier if they kept older documents in a certain wing. She said they had some extra collections in the back, but she did not give details. She seemed distracted and tired. I saw her leave at closing time. The front area stayed lit, but everything deeper inside looked darker. The front doors remained unlocked because the place closed at midnight, and I still had about an hour. I headed down a corridor that led toward the older sections of the library. The air felt stale. The smell reminded me of dusty paper and damp cloth. The overhead lights got weaker as I moved further from the main desk. The shelves in these back aisles looked uneven and older than the ones in front. Some rows had no identifying marks. I noticed that some parts of the corridor were missing proper signage. I turned a corner and expected to see a familiar room with periodicals, but I just found a doorway leading somewhere else. I checked my phone. It showed no signal. I tried to keep track of turns. One left, then a right, then straight ahead. It felt like I was going too far into the building. I knew the main section should have ended by now. I should have come across a wall or some locked gate. Instead, I reached a wing that looked completely different. There were shelves taller than me, arranged in close rows. I saw no labels on the edges. The light overhead flickered but stayed on. The spines of the books had no titles. They were covered in worn, brownish material. Some covers looked like old cloth, others seemed like rough leather. The shelves were dusty, and the floor felt gritty under my shoes. I glanced around for any sign of a catalog, but there was nothing. I tried to pull a book off the shelf. It slid out slowly. The texture felt stiff, like old cardboard. I opened it. The pages were thick and rough, not like normal paper. They had a yellowish tint and showed no page numbers. There was text on them, written in a tight, cramped style that resembled typewriting. The letters were black and uneven. I could read them, but the language felt too direct and personal. There were simple paragraphs describing some house on a street I knew, a street I had lived on years ago. It mentioned details like the layout of a living room, the shape of a couch, and the color of a front door. It talked about a man who looked like me. It described him opening a window and feeling a cold draft. It mentioned him going outside to check a garage door at night. I recognized the scene. It was similar to a routine I used to do when I lived in that old apartment building near the library. But some details were off. I never remembered the exact pattern on the rug or a particular painting on the wall. The book described these things as if I had them, but I never did. I put the book back and grabbed another one from a lower shelf. I opened it and saw more text. This time it mentioned a bus stop near my current apartment, describing the way I stood there last week, waiting for a late bus. It talked about what I was wearing, what I had in my pocket. It got those details right. It described the way I scratched my neck. I remembered doing that, but I never told anyone. I closed the book quickly. My heart beat faster. I felt sweat on my forehead. I knelt down and pulled another book from the bottom shelf. It showed a recent scene, me stepping into a corner store that I sometimes visit late at night. It talked about me looking at the beverages in the cooler, the shape of the label on a bottle I picked up, the fact that I put it back and chose a different flavor. This was too exact. I looked around. I saw hundreds of these books. None had any title. All looked worn. I had no idea how they got here. I had no idea who wrote them. I picked a random volume from a shelf above eye level. This one described things I never did. It mentioned me traveling to a city I had never visited. It described me walking down a street there, checking my phone, and entering a building I had never even heard of. It detailed me sitting at a desk and writing notes I never wrote. I shut it. My hands shook. I wanted to get out of there. I placed the book back and turned around. The aisles looked the same. I couldn't see the entrance I came through. I tried to retrace my steps. I walked toward what I thought was the exit. I found another row of shelves. I tried another direction. I saw a small reading table with a single chair and a lamp. The lamp was off. I touched it. The surface of the lamp felt cold and smooth. I tried the lamp switch. Nothing happened. I heard a faint buzzing from above. I looked up and saw one overhead light flicker. I walked toward the flickering light, hoping it would lead me back to the corridor. I moved slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground so I wouldn't trip. I expected to see the corridor at some point. Instead, I ended up in front of more shelves filled with the same kind of books. I pulled out one more, desperate to understand something. This one described a future event. It talked about me coming to the library late at night. It mentioned the time, the day, the route I took. It said I turned left, then right, and then straight into a hidden wing. It said I found these books. It said I felt confused and uneasy. It mentioned me flipping through pages. I saw my current actions on the page I was reading. I felt my chest tighten. This was impossible. I slammed the book shut. My breathing got heavy. I placed the book back and tried to remain calm. I told myself to find the corridor and head back to the front desk. I needed to see if there was still someone there. I just wanted to leave. I walked straight ahead, ignoring the strange rows of shelves. Eventually, I found the corridor. I recognized the dim overhead light and the wooden beam on one side. I followed the corridor back the way I thought I came. After a few minutes, I saw the main area with reading tables. It was empty now. The chairs were still there, but no one sat at them. I looked at my phone again. No signal. I tried to call out. "Hello?" My voice echoed. No response. The front area still had lights on. I walked toward the entrance. I saw the big glass doors. I reached them and tried to push. They wouldn't move. I tried pulling them. Nothing. I pushed harder. The doors seemed locked. They were not the kind of doors that lock from the inside at this hour. Earlier, they were open. I turned around. The lights overhead flickered again. The front desk looked empty. I walked behind the desk to see if there was a latch or a switch. I found a set of keys, but they didn't fit any visible locks on the doors. I tried each key. None worked. I looked back at the corridor that led to that strange wing. It was darker now. I heard a faint scraping sound from inside there. It sounded like a chair being moved or a book sliding on a shelf. I stood still, holding the keys, my heart pounding. I decided to check the side exits. I remembered a door near the periodical section that led to a small courtyard. I walked quickly. My shoes squeaked on the floor. When I reached the courtyard door, I tried to open it. Locked. I checked the windows. They were old and had metal frames. They didn't budge. The place suddenly felt colder. The silence pressed down on me. I stepped back into the main area and saw the lights flicker again. I looked up. The ceiling fans were off, and there was a slight hum from the fluorescent tubes. I decided to head back to that hidden wing and see if there was any clue or any other exit. I didn't know what else to do. I walked slowly down the corridor. I touched the walls with my hands to keep track. They felt rough, not like normal painted walls. The corridor felt longer now. I took careful steps. I saw the shelves come into view. This time I grabbed one of the books and tucked it under my arm. I wanted to show it to someone if I ever found a staff member. I tried to remember if I had seen a security guard. The library usually had one guard at the front, but I saw no one now. I continued walking. I passed rows of shelves and noticed something on the ground. There were small scraps of torn paper. I picked up a piece. The letters matched the style inside the books. It mentioned an event that looked familiar. I dropped it and kept going. The area felt like a maze. I turned corners and ended up at the same shelves again and again. After a few attempts, I realized I was going in circles. I decided to mark a shelf by scratching it lightly with my keys. I did that, leaving a small scratch on the wood. I walked away, took 3 turns, and ended up at the same scratched shelf. This made my chest tighten. I felt a knot in my throat. I tried to calm down by breathing slowly. I decided to try a different tactic. I went back the way I came. After several minutes, I saw the corridor again. I rushed forward and made it back to the main area. I approached the front desk again. I noticed a small door behind the desk that I hadn't checked. It was an office door, the kind staff would use. I tried the handle. Locked. I used the keys I found. One key fit. I turned it and opened the door. Inside, I saw a dimly lit office space with a single desk, a computer, and a metal filing cabinet. I went straight to the computer and tapped the keyboard. The screen lit up. It showed a login prompt. I tried typing random words. Nothing. I checked the drawers of the desk. I found a small flashlight. I flipped it on. The beam of light was weak, but better than nothing. I checked the filing cabinet. It was unlocked. Inside were folders. They listed titles of books and sections of the library. None mentioned the hidden wing. I looked for building maps. I found a small pamphlet with an old floor plan. It showed the main areas, restrooms, and storage rooms. No mention of the strange section of shelves. I put the pamphlet back. I returned to the door and stepped out. The overhead lights flickered again. The main doors remained locked. I could see the street outside. I could see the lamppost across the road. Everything outside looked normal. I banged on the glass with my palm. I yelled, hoping someone outside might hear me. No response. I tried my phone again. No signal. I checked the time. It was well past midnight now. The library should have been closed. I felt trapped. I walked over to the reading area and sat down for a moment. The chair felt hard and uncomfortable. I tried to think of something practical. There had to be a way out. I stood up and decided to check the walls near the front entrance. Sometimes old buildings have emergency exits or panels that can be opened. I ran my hand along the wall. I found a fire alarm panel. I lifted the cover and pulled the alarm. A loud ringing filled the air. I waited. The alarm kept ringing, but nothing else happened. No one came. No sprinklers, no flashing emergency lights. Just the sound of the alarm echoing in the empty library. After a minute, the alarm cut off by itself. The silence returned. The overhead lights flickered more rapidly. I looked up at them. They flickered on and off, and then they steadied again. I felt a headache forming behind my eyes. I needed another way out. I thought about breaking a window, but the windows looked reinforced. I had nothing heavy to break them with. I checked the front desk area for tools or anything that might help. I found a heavy dictionary. I tried hitting a window with it. The sound echoed, but the glass didn't crack. I tried a few more times. Nothing. My arms got tired. I took the flashlight and decided to return to the hidden wing. I thought maybe there was another door there. Maybe I missed something. I walked quickly now, shining the flashlight ahead. The beam revealed dust in the air. It showed the edges of the shelves. I noticed a gap between 2 shelves. It was small, like a narrow passage. I hadn't seen it before. I squeezed through. On the other side, I saw a wooden ladder leading up to a platform. I climbed it. The ladder creaked under my weight. On the platform, I saw a single door. It was made of wood and had a small metal handle. I turned the handle. The door opened. Behind it was a dark hallway. I shined the flashlight inside. The hallway was short. It led to another door. I walked to the second door and tried it. It opened easily. I stepped through and found myself in a back room of the library, near the staff lounge. I recognized it from a visit I made once to speak with a librarian about old records. The staff lounge had a vending machine, a couch, and a side door leading to an alley. I tried the alley door. It was unlocked. I stepped outside into the cold night air. I stood there for a moment. I looked back through the door. The inside looked normal from here. I could see the vending machine and the dull overhead light. Everything seemed ordinary in this room. I closed the door behind me and walked around the building to the front entrance. It was locked from the outside now, as it should be after hours. I looked through the glass. The main area was dimly lit, empty, and quiet. Nothing flickered. I could see the desk, the chairs, and the shelves in the distance. My heart still raced. I touched my jacket pocket. I still had one of those strange books tucked under my arm. I pulled it out and looked at it under the streetlight. The cover was rough and plain, no title, just like the others. I opened it. The pages were blank now. I flipped through them. No text. Nothing. I dropped it on the ground. I left it there. I walked away, trying not to think about what I had seen. I felt the tension in my shoulders and neck. My throat felt dry. I headed toward my apartment, keeping my eyes on the sidewalk. I didn't look back at the library. I just wanted to get home and lock my door. I wanted to turn on my lights and sit down in my kitchen with a glass of water. I wanted to forget the feeling of those old pages and the way the library lights flickered when I tried to leave. I kept walking until I reached a main street with traffic. I felt more at ease then. I didn't run. I just walked steadily, placing one foot in front of the other, focusing on the sound of distant cars and the hum of streetlights. I said nothing to anyone. I just kept going. I moved into this old house in the countryside 2 weeks ago. The place came cheap and looked simple enough. The roof did not leak, and the yard was large. The previous owner left in a hurry and sold it below market price. I did not ask many questions. I just wanted space and peace. The first nights were calm. The wind outside was steady, and there were no neighbors close by. I noticed the old well out back on the second day, but I did not think much about it at first. It was covered with warped wooden planks that looked older than the house. At night, the wind made the loose boards rattle and shift. Something about that sound drew my attention. It was not just wood scraping stone. There was another sound, quieter and more desperate. It reminded me of a muffled whimper. I tried to ignore it, but after 3 nights it got to me. I stood by my bedroom window around midnight and watched the shape of the old well. The boards on top were barely visible in the dark. I listened. The wind pressed against the walls of my house and against the side of the well. Under that steady creaking, I heard a low sound. It was like a voice that could not form words. I did not like that sound. It made my neck stiffen. I went back to bed and tried to sleep, but I could not. I kept picturing the well. In my mind, I saw something inside pushing at the boards, trying to escape. I decided I would check it out in the morning. The next day, after breakfast, I walked to the backyard. The grass was uneven and damp. I saw the well clearly now. It was made of old stones, stacked without much mortar. Green moss grew in the cracks. The wooden planks on top looked random and not well secured. I stepped closer. I noticed a smell. It was not strong at first, but it was there. It reminded me of a damp basement or a closed-off room with water damage. I leaned over and looked between 2 boards. It was dark inside. I saw nothing but blackness. The smell got stronger when I got closer, thick and humid. I could not see the bottom of the well. I listened. I heard nothing. Maybe the sound last night was just the wind. I went about my day unpacking some boxes in the living room, cleaning the kitchen and trying to arrange furniture. The house had old pipes, but the water was running fine. The sunlight through the windows was strong. I felt safe during the day. I could not shake the image of that well, though. I decided I would return to it before sunset and check if something was stuck inside. Maybe an animal. Maybe an old pipe below was causing a strange noise. I was a bit nervous, but I pushed that feeling aside. It was just an old well. In the late afternoon, I went back outside. The sun was low. The shadows were long. The air felt cooler. I stood by the well and pulled at one of the boards. It was loose and rotten. When I lifted it, a heavier smell came out. The air inside was damp and stale. It stuck to my face. I held my breath and listened. There was a sound. It was faint, a low rumble or a soft whining. It sounded like something alive, but I could not place it. I held the flashlight on my phone over the opening. I pointed the beam down. I could not see much. The light hit stones and moss. There was moisture on them. I could see the inner walls of the well. They were slick and uneven. No movement. Just darkness below. The sound continued, steady and weak. I lowered my voice and spoke. I said, "Hello?" I did not expect an answer. There was none. The sound stopped for a moment, then started again. It reminded me of an animal in distress, but not one I recognized. It did not sound like a cat, a dog, or a raccoon. It had a strange tone. I felt uneasy. My stomach tightened. The hairs on my arms stood up. I realized I was sweating, though the air was cool. The smell was making it hard to breathe. I pushed the board back into place and stepped away. I looked around the yard. Nothing else was strange, just the well. I went back inside and tried to relax. I turned on the TV and forced myself to watch something for a while. That night, the sound came back. I woke up around 2 in the morning and heard the wind outside. The boards rattled. Through the closed window, I heard that muffled noise. It rose and fell. Sometimes it was a low growl. Sometimes it sounded like someone crying softly. My heart started pounding. My mouth went dry. I knew it was coming from inside the well. I stayed in bed, silent, trying to ignore it. But I could not. Around 3, I got up and went to the kitchen. I drank water and stood by the back door, listening. The sound continued, soft but constant. I decided to do something. I grabbed a strong flashlight from my toolbox and put on my boots. I opened the door and walked into the yard. The grass was cold against my boots. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and I could barely see the well. I approached it slowly, holding the flashlight ready. The boards rattled in the breeze. I listened. The sound was definitely coming from below. I gripped one of the boards and pulled it aside. A rush of foul air hit me right in the face. It felt thick, like stepping into a humid cellar. I coughed and pointed the flashlight down again. This time I noticed something move against the stones far below. It was a shape with a dull color. I could not see eyes or limbs clearly. It shifted slowly. When the light hit it, the sound changed to a husky moan. My mouth felt bitter. My chest tightened. I felt a slight tremor in my hands. This was not normal. Something was down there. It looked alive. I could not see a clear form. The stones were wet, and the water at the bottom looked dark and still. This thing was clinging to the side, or maybe resting in a small hole in the wall. I thought maybe it was some animal stuck there. Maybe it wanted help. I felt a pulse in my ears. I asked, in a low voice, "What are you?" No answer. Just that noise, part growl, part cry. I stayed there for a few minutes, struggling to breathe and think. Then I put the board back and stepped away. I hurried inside and locked the door. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the kitchen feeling restless. The next morning I felt tired and anxious. I could not ignore this. I decided I would try to lure it out or see if it needed food. I do not know why I thought that. It just seemed like something trapped might want food or water. I took a piece of raw meat from the fridge. I had bought it yesterday. It was just a small piece of stew meat. I placed it in a bucket and tied a rope to the handle. In the daylight, I felt a bit braver. The well was silent now. No sound. The air was warmer. I removed one of the boards again. The smell was still there, unpleasant and heavy. I lowered the bucket with the meat. I let it go down slowly, using the flashlight to watch. I saw the bucket approach the dark shape. It was curled against the wall, moving slightly. When the bucket got close, I saw it shift. It made a soft hissing sound and reached toward the meat. I could see something like a limb, but it was hard to make out. It did not look like a paw or a hand. It was just a rough shape pushing at the bucket. I waited. The bucket swayed. The rope felt heavier. I thought maybe it was pulling the bucket down. After a minute, I lifted the bucket up. The meat was gone. The bucket was wet and smelled horrible. The creature made a low noise again. I stood there, not sure what to do. I lowered the bucket once more, empty this time, to see what it would do. The rope jerked and I felt a sudden pull. I almost lost my grip. I pulled back, and the bucket came up with a strange wet residue inside. My heart was racing. I backed away and replaced the board. I did not know what I was dealing with. I went back inside and tried to calm down. Over the next few days, I tried a few more times to observe it. Each time the creature made those strange noises. It seemed to respond to light and food, but it never showed its shape clearly. Its movements were slow and uncoordinated. Sometimes it tapped against the stones. Sometimes it made a gurgling sound. I never smelled anything but that thick, damp odor. The smell seemed worse each time I opened the well. At night, the sounds got louder. The wind would move the boards slightly, and I would hear that moan or growl. It sounded hungry. Maybe it wanted more meat. I tried dropping more food, but it never came out. It stayed at the bottom. It never climbed the walls. I tried waiting in silence to see if it would try to escape, but it never did. It just stayed down there, making noises and shifting in the darkness. I began to feel sick. My appetite vanished. I could not sleep well. My head hurt. I avoided going into the backyard during the evening. I started to think that maybe I should seal the well. Maybe I should put heavy stones on top and forget about it. But I knew it was alive. I could not just trap it there, yet I could not help it either. I felt angry and frustrated. I tried calling a local animal control number, but I got no help. The person on the phone said they do not handle wells or unidentified creatures. They suggested I call a well repair service. That sounded useless. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? There is a strange animal in my well making weird noises. I decided to try again, more carefully. One afternoon, around 5, I put on gloves and a scarf over my nose. I brought a better flashlight, one with a stronger beam. I also brought a long metal hook I found in the shed. My plan was to lift the boards, shine the light, and see if I could identify what was down there. If it looked like a normal animal, I could tell someone exactly what it was. If it was something else, I would figure out the next step. I just wanted to understand. I removed 2 boards this time for a better view. The smell hit me hard. I gagged and had to turn my face away for a moment. My eyes watered. I forced myself to look down. The flashlight was strong. It cut through the darkness. I saw wet stones, moss, and dirty water at the bottom. Then I saw the creature more clearly. It was pressed against the stones near the water. It had a shape that reminded me of a large sack of flesh with ridges and lumps. It had no clear eyes or ears that I could see. I saw parts of it move, like small bumps pushing outward. The surface was wet and pale. When the light hit it, the creature made that noise again. It shook slightly and trembled. I saw a part of it open like a slit, and a thick liquid dripped from it. My stomach lurched. I felt a wave of nausea. I backed up, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. I had never seen anything like this. It did not fit any animal I knew. It did not look like something that should be alive in a well. I heard it scraping against the stones. I looked back down. The creature was moving in slow motions, as if trying to reach the surface, but it never rose more than a few inches. It just pressed against the wall and then sank back down. It made that whimpering sound. It sounded weak and desperate. I lowered the hook gently, trying not to startle it. The hook touched its surface. It felt spongy and soft. The creature jerked away and made a coughing sound. I pulled the hook back. My heart was pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. I realized this was not something I could deal with by myself. I stepped back and put the boards in place. I wiped sweat from my forehead. My throat was dry. I went inside and sat at the table, staring at the wall. I wanted to leave this place, but I had just moved in. I wanted to ignore the well, but the sounds would not stop. I could not destroy it. I could not kill this thing. I was not even sure how. That night I lay in bed with the lights off. The wind came and went outside. Around midnight I heard the planks shift again. The sound was louder than before. The creature moaned, a wet and strained sound. I felt chills on my neck. I pulled the blanket up and tried to block it out. It called out again and again. I felt sweat on my temples. My stomach tightened into a knot. I had trouble breathing. I imagined it waiting down there, hungry, confused, maybe hurt. I thought about feeding it again, but that only encouraged it to make more noise. I thought about pouring something down there to make it leave, but I had no idea if it could climb out. I felt trapped by this situation. The well was on my property, and now I had to deal with it. The next morning, I woke up with a headache. I drank coffee and looked out the window. The well sat there, silent in daylight. No sound, no movement. I decided I would cover it better. I found some heavy stones near the shed and brought them over. I placed them on the boards, making it harder for the wind to shake them. I pressed them down firmly. I hoped that would reduce the noise at night. The day passed quietly. No strange sounds. The smell lingered in my mind, though, and I could taste it at the back of my throat even when I was inside. I made dinner and ate slowly, forcing the food down. At night, I lay in bed and listened. The board still rattled a little, but less. I heard a distant moan from below. It sounded weaker. I tried to relax. My heart still beat fast and my muscles were tense. I shut my eyes and waited. It cried out again, a muffled whimper. I did nothing. I just stayed in bed, breathing shallowly, trying not to imagine that horrible shape in the darkness. The next few days I kept my distance. Sometimes I heard it at night, sometimes not. I never removed the boards again. I never fed it again. The smell seemed to fade if I stayed inside and kept the windows closed. I considered leaving this house, selling it, moving away. But I had nowhere else to go right now. I considered telling someone in town, but what would I say? I pictured their faces. They would not believe me. Or if they did, they might do something cruel. I did not want to see that thing harmed. I just wanted it gone. I waited, unsure of what else to do. As the weeks passed, I learned to live with it. I kept the boards in place and did not approach the well. At night, I still heard it sometimes, soft and distant. My body still reacted with tightness in my chest and sweat on my palms, but I got used to it. I slept with earplugs and tried not to think about it. During the day, I stayed indoors and did my chores. I planned to find someone who knew about old wells, maybe a contractor who could fill it in. Until then, I would let it be. I never got a good look at that creature again. I never learned what it was. It stayed down there, hungry for attention. It cried softly at night, rattling the boards with its muffled pleas. And I stayed above, trying not to breathe too deeply when I passed by the backyard, trying not to think too hard about what lived below the surface. I walked into my living room and stopped right near the door. I had just come back from a long day and I was annoyed and tired. My shoulders felt stiff and my eyes burned a little from the dusty air. There was a dim light coming from the hallway behind me, and the living room itself was dark. I stood there holding my breath because I saw something strange. On the ceiling, right above my couch, I saw footprints. They were faint, but clear enough that I could see the shape of toes and heels. They ran along the ceiling in a sloppy line. They looked uneven, like someone had walked around upside down, or maybe crawled. I didn't move for a few seconds. My forehead got warm, and I swallowed hard. I glanced around and saw that the rest of the room looked normal. The furniture was where I had left it. The floor was fine, but those footprints were on my ceiling. I had not noticed them before. I didn't know how they got there. There was dust on my shelves and my coffee table, and I could see some of that dust disturbed near the edges of the room. It formed some kind of random shapes. They weren't letters I recognized, and they weren't drawings I understood. Just weird marks that looked smudged and uneven. I could see lighter patches and darker patches of dust. It wasn't just in one spot. It covered a wide area above me. My chest got tight. I cleared my throat and reached for the light switch. I flicked it on. The moment I turned on the light, I looked up again. The footprints were gone. The ceiling looked normal, just a flat surface with some old paint and a few chips near the corners. I blinked a few times. I stood on my toes and squinted, but I saw nothing unusual. I turned the lights off again and backed away toward the doorway. The ceiling became hard to see in the dim light. I couldn't confirm if the footprints were still there in the dark or if I had imagined them. I could feel my legs shaking a bit. I tried to steady myself by pressing my left hand against the wall. My back felt cold. A chill ran from my neck down to my waist. I took a deep breath, trying not to panic. My heart was beating faster than normal. I decided to walk further into the room. I took a few steps forward and stood under where I had seen the footprints. I looked straight up. I couldn't see anything unusual now. It was just a ceiling with some faint stains. But my stomach was tense and the air in the room felt heavy and stale. I could almost taste dust in my mouth. My eyes watered a bit. I wiped them with the back of my hand and sniffed. There was something else bothering me. The silence in the room felt off. It wasn't the usual quiet. I could hear my own breathing, and the sound seemed louder than normal. Each time I inhaled, I heard a soft crack in the walls. Each time I exhaled, it felt like the air pressure changed. I listened carefully and heard a faint creaking sound, repeating in slow intervals. It was steady. It wasn't random. It reminded me of slow, deliberate movement somewhere in the structure of the house. My ears felt sensitive. I tried to figure out if it came from the attic or the walls. I couldn't tell. It was low and soft, but it didn't stop. I looked at the dust again. I walked over to my coffee table and ran my finger across the surface. It came away gray and gritty. The dust was thick. I don't remember leaving the house that dirty. I wiped my finger on my jeans and crouched down. On the floor, there was some dust shaped in streaks. They weren't neat lines. They curved and crossed over each other. I leaned in and sniffed. It just smelled like old dust, maybe mixed with something musty. I stayed crouched for a moment, listening. The creaking continued, steady and low. I stood up and walked over to the light switch again. I wanted to test something. I flicked the light off. The room went dark, except for a bit of light coming from the hallway. I stepped toward the center of the room and looked up again. At first, I saw nothing. I waited, letting my eyes adjust. After a minute or so, I thought I saw faint shapes again. Footprints. They weren't as clear as before, but I could make out some dark patches on the ceiling. I wasn't imagining it. They were there. My throat went dry. I slowly reached out and turned the light back on. The ceiling looked normal again. My heart was pounding. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe there was some kind of residue or mold on the ceiling that only showed up in low light. I didn't want to jump to strange conclusions, but the feeling in my body wasn't normal. I was sweating under my arms and on my lower back. I wiped my palms on my pants. I had a nervous ache in my stomach. I decided to get a chair and stand on it to get a closer look at the ceiling. I wanted to touch it and see if there was anything there. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a wooden chair. I carried it back to the living room and placed it under the area where I had seen the footprints. I climbed onto it. I reached up and ran my hand over the ceiling. It felt like painted drywall, slightly dusty, but nothing unusual. I patted it lightly and pressed in a few places. No difference. I got off the chair and stared at the spot again. With the lights on, nothing changed. I turned the lights off again and climbed back up. I had my face inches from the ceiling. My eyes adjusted, and I saw faint outlines of footprints again. They seemed to shimmer in the darkness, as if something about the lack of light made them visible. I reached up and touched the spots directly. My fingertips felt nothing strange, just a slight layer of dust. But when I pulled my hand away, I noticed the dust on my fingertips glowed faintly for a second, then went dark. I gasped and almost fell off the chair. I caught my balance and got down. My chest felt tight again. I went to the kitchen and washed my hands. The water felt cold. I scrubbed the dust off and dried my hands on a towel. My throat hurt a bit and my ears still picked up that steady creak. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. I walked back into the living room. I kept the lights on this time. I sat on the couch and tried to calm down. I wanted to understand what was happening. My body was tense and I tapped my foot on the floor repeatedly. I looked around, checking the corners of the room, looking for anything out of place. The furniture looked normal. The TV was off. The shelves were still holding books and a few souvenirs. The windows were closed. The curtains were drawn. The door to the hallway was open, and I could see the faint glow of the ceiling light in the hall. Everything seemed normal except for that strange situation on the ceiling in the dark. I decided to check the attic. Maybe there was a leak or something causing strange reflections. I went to the hallway, pulled down the attic ladder, and climbed up. The attic was small and dusty. I had a flashlight. I aimed it around slowly. I saw old boxes, some insulation material, and a few cobwebs. The wooden beams looked old, but stable. I didn't see any footprints on the beams. The air was stale, and I coughed a few times. I moved the flashlight around carefully. Nothing moved. I waited in silence, listening. The creaking sound was fainter up here, but still present. It seemed to come from the walls. I tapped on a beam. Solid. I shone the flashlight on the floorboards. Just dust and some scattered nails. I climbed back down. I closed the attic door and stood there for a moment, thinking. I felt uncomfortable. My arms were tense, my jaw was clenched. I tried to relax by rolling my shoulders. I paced around the living room, turning the lights on and off a few times, each time checking for the footprints. Each time I turned the lights off, I saw them again. Each time I turned them on, they disappeared. I tried shining my flashlight at the ceiling with the main lights off. The footprints didn't show up under the flashlight. They only showed up in near darkness. I wiped some more dust off a shelf and watched it settle in the air. The dust floated around, slowly drifting. I noticed that the pattern on the floor changed when I walked around. My footsteps disturbed the dust. I knelt down and tried to trace some of the strange marks with my finger. They smeared easily. After a few tries, I managed to erase some of them. Nothing happened immediately, but the steady creaking in the walls seemed to get slightly louder. I stood up and looked around. The air felt heavy again. My breathing got faster. The hair on my arms stood up. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. My heart pounded against my chest. I stepped back into the hallway and turned off all the lights in the house. I wanted to see what would happen if I left the whole place dark. I stood there in complete darkness. My eyes adjusted, and the living room came into faint focus from the light outside filtering through the curtains. I saw the footprints on the ceiling again, clearer than before. They seemed to move this time. I couldn't see actual movement, but each time I looked away and then looked back, their position changed slightly. My stomach turned, and I felt like I might be sick. I leaned against the wall, breathing slowly through my nose. I turned the lights back on and stayed in the hallway for a few seconds. My heart was racing. I kept rubbing my hands together. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave my own home, but staying here made me feel tense and wired. I decided to open a window and get some fresh air. The night air was cool. I stuck my head out and took a few deep breaths. I smelled the familiar scent of the neighborhood outside. It was calm and quiet. I pulled my head back in and closed the window. Inside, the atmosphere felt stale again. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was imagining this. Maybe I was overly tired. I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and returned to the living room. I turned the lights off again, and there were the footprints, faint and shifting. I leaned forward, staring up, and whispered, "What is this?" My voice sounded small in the dark. I got no answer. There was no voice, no whisper, no growl. Just that soft creaking in the walls and the faint shapes on the ceiling. I moved the couch aside and stood directly under the area where the footprints were visible. I reached up, even though I knew I wouldn't feel anything. My fingertips touched the ceiling. Just dust. No texture changes. I waited, listening. The creaking noise continued at the same steady pace. It never sped up, never slowed down. It was like a constant presence. I turned the lights back on and pulled the chair over again. I climbed up and tried wiping the ceiling with a damp rag. I wanted to remove whatever was causing the marks. I wiped back and forth, pressing firmly. Dust fell on me. I coughed and rubbed my face. When I climbed down and turned the lights off, the footprints were still there. I felt my chest tighten. My legs were weak. I sat down on the floor and pressed my hands against my face. My breathing was fast and shallow. I tried to control it by inhaling slowly through my nose and exhaling through my mouth. I stood up again and paced around. I checked the front door. It was locked. The windows were locked. Nothing was out of place. Only the ceiling changed in the dark. I tried to ignore the footprints and focus on the rest of the room. Nothing else was strange with the lights off except the dust patterns. They were random smudges. I brushed them away with my hand, and more dust drifted in the air. The smell was musty. It made the back of my throat itch. I began to wonder if the footprints would appear anywhere else. I went to my bedroom and turned off the lights there. Nothing unusual on the ceiling. No footprints. Just darkness and some faint outline of furniture. I went back to the living room. They were still there, always in the same area, but their exact pattern seemed to shift when I looked away. This made my skin crawl. My lower back tensed up. I clenched my fists. I wanted to scream, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to lose control. I could feel sweat under my shirt. Time passed slowly. I didn't look at the clock. I just kept testing the room. Lights on, lights off. Always the same thing. I tried looking at them from different angles. Tried using a camera on my phone. With the flash on, nothing showed up in the photos. With the flash off, I got useless dark images. I tapped my phone against my palm and frowned. The atmosphere felt thick. I had a slight headache. My eyes were dry from staring. I turned the lights on and decided to sit on the couch for a while. I listened to the creaking sound and tried to understand it. It was always there, always steady, always in the background. It never stopped. I couldn't find a source for it. I tapped on the walls and floor. It sounded hollow in some places, solid in others. The noise didn't change. I held my breath to see if it was my own breathing causing it. It kept going. Eventually, I gave up trying to remove the footprints or stop the noise. I just sat there, keeping the lights on, because with the lights on, I couldn't see them. This felt safer. My muscles were sore, my neck was stiff, and my mind was racing. I was angry, confused, and scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't know what I would say. There were no obvious signs of break-in or damage, just those strange footprints visible only in the dark. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. I stayed there for hours, afraid to turn the lights off, afraid to go to bed. I listened to the slow creaking in the walls and watched the dust float in the air. I tried to breathe slowly and stay calm. At some point, I realized I would have to live with this, at least for tonight. Nothing attacked me. Nothing touched me. The footprints didn't come closer or fall off the ceiling. They just stayed up there, out of reach, only visible when the lights were off. I rubbed my eyes and sighed. My chest still felt tight and my mouth was dry, but I was too tired to keep testing things. I decided to stay awake until morning. When morning came, the sunlight would fill the room. Maybe then I could pretend everything was normal. For now, I kept the lights on, kept my eyes open, and listened to the house. I didn't move from the couch. I didn't close my eyes. I stayed there, breathing, waiting, and hoping that eventually this strange night would end.